Hey guys, tonight we're time travelling back to an era that smells, well, let's just say it smells lived in. Welcome to Victorian England, a place where soap is controversial, sewage is decorative, and deodorant hasn't even entered the group chat. If you've ever skipped a shower and felt guilty about it, this episode's going to make you feel like royalty. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your city and the time you're watching this. I want to know who's tuning in at 3 AM from Cleveland. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in a creaky, narrow bed, wrapped in stiff wool sheets that have been washed approximately never. The room smells faintly of coal smoke, wet dog, and something vaguely sour that your brain refuses to identify. There's condensation on the tiny window pane, and outside you can just make out the grey outlines of chimneys coughing into the morning fog. Or is it smog? It's impossible to tell in Victorian London. You stretch, trying not to brush your bare feet against the floorboards, which are gritty and mysteriously damp in one corner. Your nightshirt, heavy with days of wear, clings in places you wish it wouldn't. You wonder, briefly, whether today's the day you'll finally bathe. But the thought evaporates when you remember what that actually entails. Hauling buckets of freezing water, stoking a fire for hours, and then maybe, pouring that effort into a tin tub that hasn't seen a proper scrub since Queen Victoria's wedding. Most folks around you are on the same routine. Bathing is considered something you do before a special event. A wedding, perhaps, or your own funeral. Maybe if you're scandalously modern, you go to one of those newfangled public bathhouses. But even then, people raise eyebrows. Why would a decent person subject themselves to full-body nudity unless they were up to no good? Here's a harsh truth. You probably won't survive this era. Not because of the hygiene, though it's doing its best to kill you. No, you're also dealing with food that's often laced with chalk, beer that's safer than water, and a medical community that still thinks pus is a sign of healthy healing. But the hygiene alone, it's a gauntlet, and you haven't even touched your face yet. Don't. Just don't. You make your way to the washstand in the corner. There's a cracked ceramic bowl filled with what was once clean water. Now it's grey, with an oily film sliding across the top. A stiff rag lies beside it. This is your morning routine. Splash some tepid grime on your face, pat it dry with a towel that smells like old pennies, and call it personal grooming. Downstairs, the city is already in motion. Horse-drawn carriages clatter over cobblestones slick with rain. Manure and probably worse. Chimney sweeps scamper across rooftops, trailing soot like little industrial gremlins. And everywhere, there's a thin layer of dust. Coal dust. Soot dust. Human skin dust. It coats your lungs with every breath. And yet, somehow, it's almost comforting. Like the city is tucking you in, with grime. You pass people in the street who look remarkably clean, for the time. A woman in a bonnet has carefully brushed her teeth with charcoal powder and rinsed with brandy. A man struts past with his hair greased and parted, not realising that the pomade he's using is basically scented lard. Everyone is doing their best to not smell worse than their neighbour. It's an unspoken contest, and losing is deeply social. The official historical fact of the day. In 1842, a British social reformer named Edwin Chadwick published a report on the sanitary conditions of the labouring classes. It was the start of people realising, hey, maybe open sewers in the middle of a densely populated city aren't ideal. His work eventually led to major public health reforms, but not quickly. Victorians were deeply sceptical of cleanliness. They believed too much bathing could strip away your natural defences, like your oils were some kind of divine armour, and soap was sacrilegious. Now here's a weird fringe fact for your brain to chew on. Some people believed that washing too often could stir up diseases in your system. Bathing, they thought, disrupted the body's natural humours and made you vulnerable. One writer even warned that cold water could chill the soul. So next time you're debating whether to shower, just remember, you're protecting your soul. Of course, scholars still debate just how filthy the Victorians really were. Some argue that people actually did wash more often than we give them credit for, just not in ways we'd recognise. They might have done sponge baths, washed hands and faces daily, or changed undergarments with surprising regularity. But the inconsistency of record keeping, and the wide variation across class and region, makes it hard to pin down. Was the average factory worker filthier than a duchess? Maybe. But if the Duchess never scrubbed her corset, it's a close race. As the city awakens around you, the smells intensify. Coal fires, boiled cabbage, horse sweat, and somewhere, a bakery. Thank heaven. You're learning to separate the layers of scent like a wine connoisseur, nose trained by survival. This isn't just a time period. It's a full-body experience, and it's barely breakfast. You duck under a sooty awning as a wagon trundles by, its wheels splashing through something you don't want to know about. The driver barely glances at you. He probably hasn't bathed in weeks either. That's the great equalizer in this world. Royal or rat catcher, everyone smells a little right by mid-morning. So here you are, freshly unwashed and absolutely fitting in. You've entered an era where hygiene is a philosophical question, soap is an occasional treat, and your nose is on high alert. But the real adventure's just beginning. You're not even 5 minutes into your Victorian day when you realise something. Water, clean water anyway, is not a given. It's a luxury, a mystery, and in some cases a straight-up hazard. The concept of turning a tap and getting a drinkable stream is the stuff of utopian science fiction. Here, in the sooty heart of 19th century Britain, water is more often your enemy than your ally. The pump in the square, that chipped iron thing with a rusted handle, draws a crowd by mid-morning. Housewives in layered skirts, kids with hollow-eyed stares, and even the odd gentleman with a brass-capped cane line up for their daily allotment. It looks democratic, almost cheerful, until you realise this same pump serves dozens of households, and no one's entirely sure where it draws from. A well? A spring? A sewer with confidence issues? You fill your tin mug and stare into it. The water's got a yellowish cast like oversteeped tea, and there's something floating in it that moves when you stir. You lower the mug without drinking. Maybe tea can wait. Victorian cities grew faster than their plumbing could handle. The population of London doubled between 1800 and 1850, but the infrastructure, not so much. In most areas, water came from local rivers, often downstream from where sewage was dumped. That's right. People were drinking the same water they used to flush out waste, and when we say flush, we mean dump from a window or empty into a street-level channel and hope the rain takes care of it. You walk further down the alley toward a narrow cart path, trying not to splash your boots in anything suspect. You pass a water seller. Yes, that's a job. He's pushing a wooden barrel on wheels, offering fresh water to homes that can afford it. The irony, of course, is that his supply probably comes from the same contaminated sources. Still, he does a brisk trade. People like the idea of clean water, even if they can't confirm it. Want a historical fact? Let's go to 1854, when a physician named John Snow, not the brooding swordsman from Game of Thrones, traced a deadly cholera outbreak to a single water pump on Broad Street. It was a game changer. Up until then, people believed in miasma, the idea that bad smells caused disease. But Snow figured out the disease was in the water, and his findings eventually led to changes in sanitation policy. Still, plenty of people dismissed him, because invisible germs in water just sounded like witchcraft with extra steps. You pass a laundress scrubbing linens in a cold basin on her stoop. Her red hands are trembling, and the water she's using looks like something a horse sneezed into, but it's all she has. Soap is expensive, water is scarce, and the work still has to be done. She glances up at you, gives a tight-lipped nod, then goes back to wringing out the same fabric she's already rinsed twice. Fringe fact. Some folks believed that collecting rainwater off rooftops was the best way to get pure water, and to be fair, it kind of was. Until you consider what was on those rooftops. Birds, soot, industrial dust, dead insects. Some households used barrels to catch runoff from their slanted tiles, but even then, the water would sit for days, getting slimy, turning green, and becoming home to all sorts of squirmy things. Still, compared to the Thames, it was a spa treatment. As you make your way back toward the main road, you notice how everyone's relationship with water is complicated. People are obsessed with it, avoid it, fear it, revere it. There are religious folks who still consider bathing too sensual or self-indulgent. Others are starting to warm to the idea that water might actually help prevent disease, thanks to reformers like Florence Nightingale and the aforementioned John Snow. But these ideas are slow to spread, especially among the working poor, who don't have time to debate hygiene philosophy when they're just trying to keep bread on the table. There's a scholarly debate that still simmers today about whether water access really was that bad for everyone. Some argue that in rural areas, or among wealthier households, people had their own wells and cisterns that produced fairly clean water, at least compared to city sludge. Others say that even the countryside wasn't immune to contamination, especially as more people moved out of cities and into industrial villages with similar waste problems. The short answer? It varied wildly. But for the average city dweller, clean water was not part of the daily plan. Survival was. You stop outside a corner tea shop. It smells heavenly. Warm biscuits, steeping leaves, maybe a faint trace of lavender soap if someone just washed their hands. Miracle. The tea is served hot, which is half the point. Boiling water helps kill the nasties, though no one really knows that yet. They just think it tastes better warm and hides the flavour of whatever questionable well it came from. You sip it gratefully. For the first time all day, you're not worried about what's crawling in your cup. Behind the shop, a young boy is filling a watering can from a cistern. You hear him mutter to himself and spit into the barrel before turning back inside. You decide not to think about it. As you walk again through the cobbled streets, you notice the endless gutters running along the sides, small channels meant to carry away rainwater, but mostly clogged with soot, horse droppings and rotten vegetables. Occasionally, a servant tips a slop bucket into one, adding a waterfall of mystery liquids to the mess. You sidestep it just in time. This is your life now, constantly navigating filth, avoiding puddles, judging water by colour and smell. It's no wonder that alcohol, ale, gin, even wine, became safer options. At least fermentation killed some of the bugs. Kids were sometimes weaned onto beer instead of water, and doctors didn't bat an eye. A pint a day keeps the cholera away might as well have been an official slogan. Still, there's a strange kind of comfort to it all. People are adaptable. They learn the dangers and steer around them. They build little rituals, boiling water for tea, filtering through cloth, trusting in rain barrels. The poorest families still make do, careful and hopeful, often choosing to risk thirst over disease. You look at your hands, already they're grimy again. Under your fingernails a fine film of city life has gathered. Dust, ash, traces of everything you've touched. There's no hand sanitizer, no warm tap waiting, just a grimy rag and a splash from a communal bowl. And somehow this is normal, expected. A daily gamble with stakes that include diarrhea, dysentery or something worse. But you press on, now aware of the quiet war happening in every cup, every splash, every breath. Welcome to a world where water isn't just scarce, it's strategic. You might think, after that grim tango with London's water supply, that people would want to bathe more often. You'd be wrong. In the Victorian mindset, a full-body bath is somewhere between an emergency response and a spiritual crisis. It's not just inconvenient, it's downright suspicious. If someone tells you they took a bath last week, you'd probably lean in and whisper, "Why? What happened?" You roll out of bed again, same scratchy sheets, same dubious smells, and face the tin basin with your usual dread. But today it's bath day, don't get too excited. It's not a hot shower with rose-scented suds and a loofah. It's more like preparing for a tiny war that ends with you slightly cleaner and fully exhausted. The Victorian bath is a production. First, someone has to carry gallons of water from the pump, usually in a pail balanced on each end of a yoke. If you're lucky, someone else heats it over a coal stove. Then, finally, the water's poured into a short, narrow tin tub that's freezing to the touch and about as inviting as a garbage can. Depending on your class, this might happen in the kitchen, in a back courtyard, or, in the worst cases, in your bedroom next to a drafty window. You step in carefully, trying not to slip, not to shiver too hard, and not to think too much about the last person who used the same tub and how often it gets scrubbed. Spoiler, it doesn't. And here's the kicker, soap is not a daily companion. The good stuff is expensive, often heavily perfumed, and comes in hard, waxy bars that don't lather unless you really work at it. If you're poor, you might use homemade lye soap which smells vaguely of ashes and makes your skin feel like you're slowly transforming into a statue. Let's talk history for a moment. In the early 1800s, the average person bathed maybe once a month, and bath could mean a sponge off, a wipe down, or literally sitting in the same tub as the rest of your family, one after the other, in order of social importance. Yes, family bath order was a thing. If you're the youngest, congrats, you're washing in the equivalent of meat soup. By mid-century, public bathhouses started to appear, especially in cities. These were supposed to help the working poor stay clean, and by extension, healthy. But they were controversial. Some people thought communal baths promoted immorality, others thought they'd spread disease. And honestly, when you consider that a dozen strangers might rotate through the same wooden tub before the water gets changed, they had a point. There's a particularly strange fringe fact from the time. Many Victorians believed that the body absorbed illness through the skin, especially through open pores. Bathing, which opened those pores with warm water and steam, was seen as inviting disease. So the logic went something like this. Dirty skin equals safe, sealed armour. Clean skin equals vulnerable and weak. Which is a great excuse not to scrub your feet, but maybe not a winning public health strategy. Still, bathing wasn't always avoided entirely. Wealthier Victorians had more private routines. They might have a bathroom, or at least a designated washing area, within their home, complete with running water if they were extraordinarily well off. Those lucky few even had copper bathtubs, elegantly set into tiled corners. But even then, a bath was an event, not a routine. It required time, servants, and a stoic acceptance of water that never stayed hot long enough. Scholars still argue about how often people truly bathed. There's no universal answer. Personal letters, advertisements, and reformer writings suggest a wide variation. A middle-class woman might wash her face and hands daily and soak once a week. A factory worker might sponge off with cold water before work and call it a day. A sailor might not bathe for months. But there's a general consensus. Daily full-body washing was not the norm for anyone, not even the Queen. You climb out of your bath, finally. The water's gone from lukewarm to icy, and there's a layer of grey residue drifting like sea foam on top. You towel off with something that feels like a cross between burlap and sandpaper, then wrap yourself in layers of clothing. You'd think being clean would feel refreshing, but in this damp chill, it's just another step in getting cold all over again. Back in the kitchen, someone's boiling potatoes and the steam rises in a thick wave, fogging the windows and your glasses if you had them. You smell onions, meat scraps, maybe a carrot if times are good. This is the real warmth of the house. Not the bath, but the food, the fire, the shared bodies in the same room. What's interesting is how people approached body odour in this era. It wasn't seen as offensive so much as natural. A little sweat, a little funk. It meant you were working hard. Over-cleanliness, on the other hand, hinted at vanity or worse. There's even a quote from the time suggesting that a faint aroma of humanity was preferable to smelling like perfume. You're not gross, you're authentic. As you dry your feet and put on thick stockings, you realise the whole ritual of bathing for most Victorians was more about symbolism than sanitation. You bathed for important occasions or when death loomed near, or if a doctor prescribed it. It was a marker of change, not maintenance. You were scrubbing off more than dirt. You were wiping away illness, sin, or social stigma. Outside, kids chase each other through alleys, their faces streaked with soot and jam. No one bats an eye. A shopkeeper sweeps his stoop, more concerned about the appearance of cleanliness than the real thing, and a gentleman in a crisp cravat walks past, his coat spotless, his collar white, and his armpits. Well, let's not dwell on that. The idea that cleanliness equals health is just starting to gain ground, thanks to reformers and physicians pushing for better urban sanitation. But it's not personal hygiene they're focused on. It's sewage systems, clean streets, public water. Bathing habits are still stubbornly personal and slow to change. You step outside, wrapped in your post-bath glow, and realise something strange. No one else notices. You're cleaner than you've been in weeks, and yet in this world it doesn't matter. It's not a badge of pride. It's not even visible beneath your 3 layers of wool and linen. You feel oddly disappointed, but you also feel warmer, calmer, like you've shed a skin. You may not survive this era, but at least today you're not dying of shame. You step into the chilly street the morning after your once-in-a-blue-moon bath, and suddenly you're hyper-aware of how out of place you feel. Not because you're clean, though yes, that's definitely a factor, but because you realise you're thinking about it. The others? Not so much. No one is scanning the crowd wondering who last used lye soap. That's just not the vibe here. And yet, as you make your way toward the edge of town, you catch wind, literally, of something unusual. Eucalyptus? Rosemary? Lavender? You follow your nose past the butcher's, past the tannery with its ever-present aroma of misery, and land outside a narrow brick building with an arched wooden sign. Public Baths and Wash House, it reads. Beneath that, in smaller lettering, admission 1 penny. Soap extra. You squint at the doorway. It's dark, a little damp around the frame, and the floor just inside is slick with mud and footprints. Still, this place represents the bleeding edge of Victorian hygiene reform. A penny for a bath? That's almost affordable. Not free, mind you, but within reach if you're not scraping bottom that week. Inside, the air is heavy and wet, like a kettle perpetually on boil. You hear the clank of buckets, the hiss of steam, and the low murmur of voices, mostly women chatting as they scrub children or rinse long skirts. There's an odd intimacy to it. This is where the public and the private blur. You don't just come here to get clean. You come to check in on each other, share gossip, maybe complain about your landlord's pigs again. The bathhouse is split by gender, of course. Victorian modesty would accept nothing less. Men and women enter through separate doors, use different tubs, and even get different hours in some locations. But even with all these precautions, bathhouses carry a bit of social stigma. To some people, they reek of moral decay more than anything else. The very idea of strangers undressing, even behind curtains, is enough to trigger sermons. Still, this is progress. These bathhouses began cropping up after the Baths and Wash Houses Act of 1846, a groundbreaking piece of legislation that allowed municipalities to set up public facilities for washing both bodies and clothes. Radical stuff. It wasn't about luxury. It was about survival. Disease was running rampant, and reformers finally convinced Parliament that cleanliness might actually reduce illness. Revolutionary. You're handed a small square of coarse soap by a matron with forearms like tree trunks and a no-nonsense glare. She points you toward an empty booth with a wooden bench and a rusted tub. You undress, trying not to think too hard about what your neighbours might hear through the thin partitions, and lower yourself into the water. It's lukewarm, slightly cloudy, and somehow still leagues better than the freezing basin at home. You scrub in silence. No one sings here. No one splashes. Bathhouses are serious, purposeful places. You get clean, you get out, you pay your penny, and you return to a world that may or may not care. Here's your historical fact for the evening. In the early days of public baths, soap often cost extra. That tiny bar, half the size of your palm, might be another half penny, and many couldn't afford it. Some tried to sneak their own homemade soap in. Others skipped it entirely and just hoped the warm water and friction would do the trick. If you ever doubted the power of soap marketing, imagine a world where it's considered a splurge, and for your quirky fringe tidbit, some bathhouses had first-class and second-class tubs. Yes, even in the land of communal cleanliness, class stratification lived on. The first-class tubs were deeper, with hotter water, better ventilation, and, this one's the kicker, fresh water for each bather. Second class, you shared, as in, reused the water, just like back home, but with more strangers. If you ever wondered what aristocracy smelled like, it was probably slightly less recycled. Scholars still debate how effective these bathhouses were. Some argue they were underused by the very communities they were meant to serve. Others suggest they were wildly popular, just hard to maintain. Most agree they represented a turning point, not just in hygiene, but in how society viewed personal care as part of public health. It wasn't just your business anymore, it was everyone's. You finish up and dry yourself with a threadbare towel provided at the entrance. You don't feel pampered, exactly, but there's a strange satisfaction in knowing you've participated in something communal, civic, almost noble. Cleanliness here is part of a movement, a quiet rebellion against grime and disease. You leave your penny in the box by the door, pull your boots back on and re-enter the foggy city. Outside, a young boy watches you with suspicion. He probably knows you came from the bathhouse. Maybe he's jealous, maybe he's judging, maybe both. Either way, you can't help but feel a little smug. Down the road, another public facility looms, the municipal laundry. Don't confuse this with the bathhouse, though they're often next door. This one's for clothes, not bodies. Inside, women beat garments against washboards and stir linens in boiling cauldrons of grey water. The air is thick with steam and shouting. It's less a spa and more a battlefield. But here too, cleanliness is creeping into public life, one blistered hand at a time. As you walk away, you spot a flyer nailed to a wall. It reads, "Wash your sins away. cleanliness is godliness. It's a sermon ad, promising salvation through soap. A little aggressive maybe, but it speaks to the shifting mentality. Clean isn't just nice anymore, it's righteous, it's modern, it's how you tell the civilized from the savage. You're beginning to understand how revolutionary that penny bath truly is. It's not just about hygiene, it's about dignity, about having access to the same basic self-respect as someone twice your income. That one small bar of soap could mean the difference between being accepted or shunned, welcomed or mocked. Of course, once you leave the bathhouse, the city wastes no time undoing your progress. A wagon sloshes through a puddle and sends a streak of something unholy across your trousers. A chimney belches black soot into your newly rinsed hair. A butcher tosses yesterday's entrails into the gutter, and you step around them like you're playing hopscotch with death. But you don't care. You've bathed. You've joined a movement. You might even go back next month. You've bathed. You've survived. You've stepped cautiously back into the grime with a fresh layer of self-respect clinging to you like the last bit of hot steam. But there's still one part of you that refuses to cooperate, your mouth. Because in the grand symphony of Victorian hygiene failures, dental care hits an impressively sour note. You catch your reflection in a bakery window, wavy and smudged, but good enough to get a glimpse of your teeth. They're not great. A little yellow, maybe a tad grey around the edges. Not that anyone around you would notice. Dental standards, shall we say, are low. Unless you're a caricatured villain in a Penny Dreadful or Queen Victoria herself, no one expects you to have a Hollywood smile. Gaps are common, stains are universal, breath that could drop a horse? Pretty standard. So what exactly did people do for oral hygiene back then? Brace yourself. If you were dedicated, and I mean really motivated, you might start the day by rubbing your teeth with crushed charcoal, burnt bread, or even brick dust. Yes, actual ground-up brick. The goal was to scrape off anything that looked suspiciously like decay, even if that meant sanding off a bit of tooth enamel in the process. The more common option was a dry cloth or a stiff bristle brush made from pig hair. Soft bristles were for cowards. A strong Victorian mouth needed a strong scrub. Just ignore the bleeding gums. That means it's working. Toothpaste, as we know it, didn't really exist yet. There were powders sold in little tins, some flavoured with chalk, others with baking soda, and the real fancy stuff might even have cloves or mint. If you were poor, you made your own. A popular recipe, equal parts soot and salt. Yep, gargling the flavour of a chimney in the ocean. Delicious. Here's a historical fact that might make you wince. Sugar consumption skyrocketed during the Victorian era. Thanks to Britain's growing colonial empire and, let's not sugarcoat it, slave labour, sugar became cheap and widely available. Cakes, puddings, treacle tarts, all the things Dickens loved writing about were suddenly in reach, and so were the cavities that came with them. Dental decay became rampant, especially among the working class. People were literally rotting from the inside out, one molar at a time. If things got really bad, and by really bad we mean abscessed, throbbing and possibly leaking, you could visit the local barber, that's right. He didn't just trim beards, he also yanked teeth, often with no anaesthetic beyond a stiff drink and a friend to hold you down. Forceps, a good grip, and a complete disregard for jaw alignment. That was Victorian oral surgery. Want something weirder? Here's your fringe fact. Some Victorians believed you could cure toothaches by wearing a dead mole around your neck. Not a dried one, a freshly killed one. For reasons that were never adequately explained, people thought the mole's life force, or its death shudder, depending on who you asked, would pull the pain out of your body. It's the kind of logic that makes leeches look like cutting-edge medicine. Still, scholars argue about how widespread dental neglect really was. Some recent archaeological studies show that, surprisingly, many working-class Victorians had better teeth than their wealthier counterparts. Why? Less sugar. The upper class could afford sweets and exotic fruits year-round, while the poor often lived on bread, porridge and pickled things, foods less likely to cause cavities. Of course, those diets came with their own nutritional nightmares, but at least their teeth had a fighting chance. You step into a little general store where glass jars of tooth powder sit next to combs, ribbons and lace. The tins are small, labelled with elegant scrawl, Dentaline, Pearl White, or the overly confident Instant Smile. You pick one up and flip it over. Ingredients: chalk, alum, powdered bone and clove oil. Honestly, could be worse. You buy it for a few pence and promise yourself you'll try it tomorrow. Maybe. Outside, a street hawker is yelling about miracle cures. Tooth tinctures for aching jaws, guaranteed to kill the pain or your money back. You're tempted until you realise his miracle cure is probably laudanum and turpentine. It'll numb the pain, sure, but it'll also knock you out and possibly remove a year of your life. You pass a child selling newspapers with a gap-toothed grin, his gums swollen and red. He's maybe 7. He probably already knows what it feels like to have a tooth rot out of his mouth. There's no paediatric dentist in this world, no fluoride rinse or orthodontic plan. If you're lucky, you keep most of your teeth into your 30s. After that, it's a slow surrender. False teeth are a thing, but not a comforting one. The best sets are made from ivory or porcelain and are prohibitively expensive. The cheaper ones? Human teeth, often harvested from the mouths of the dead. Battlefields, cemeteries, and unclaimed bodies. Called Waterloo teeth, they were grim souvenirs of the Napoleonic Wars. Yes, the literal teeth of fallen soldiers might end up clacking in the mouth of a wealthy Victorian socialite. Try not to think about it too hard the next time someone smiles at you too enthusiastically. Back home, you finally pop open your tin of dental powder. It smells sharp, earthy, and slightly medicinal. You dip your pig hair brush into it, grit your teeth, and start scrubbing. The powder grinds against your molars like sand on tile. You spit into the chamber pot and watch the dark sludge swirl before you rinse with a splash of cold water that tastes faintly of rust. You breathe in through your mouth. It doesn't smell minty, it smells neutral. That's honestly a win. You might not have bright white teeth, but at least they're not actively trying to flee your face. There's something oddly empowering about it. In a world where basic hygiene is an uphill battle, brushing your teeth, even poorly, is a little rebellion. A small, gritty, chalk-dusted act of defiance against entropy. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, feel the tender sting of abraded gums, and smile. It's not pretty, but it's yours. You step back out into the Victorian street with teeth that feel, well, not exactly clean, but at least like they've been scoured into submission. The corners of your mouth still sting slightly from the salt and bone cocktail you just applied, but you're optimistic. You're starting to think, maybe I can survive this century after all. And then the wind shifts, and someone passes you on the street and the reality hits you like a lard-scented brick. No one wears deodorant. To be fair, the word deodorant doesn't even really exist in your time. The concept of blocking or masking body odour is still in its awkward teenage years, and for the average Victorian, sweat isn't something you control. It's just something you have, a badge of effort, an unavoidable fact of living, like chimney soot and moral judgment. You pull your coat tighter as a pair of men stroll by in top hats and waistcoats, their underarms blooming with damp crescents. No one says anything. No one needs to. You're living in a time where personal scent is as identifiable as a fingerprint. People know you by how you smell, and unless you're swimming in rosewater, you probably smell like a combination of boiled wool, stale tobacco, and whatever you ate 3 days ago. The average Victorian doesn't bathe daily, doesn't change clothes frequently, and definitely doesn't own anything like modern antiperspirant. Instead, they mask, heavily. Colognes, powders, scented handkerchiefs, these are the weapons of choice in the olfactory battlefield. For men, that might mean bay rum or violet water splashed generously onto the neck and wrists. For women, it could be jasmine perfume dabbed behind the ears or sachets of lavender sewn into corsets. But no one's trying to stop sweating. That idea hasn't even broken into the medical world yet. Here's your historical fact. The first commercial deodorant wasn't released until 1888. It was called Mum, and it was basically a waxy cream you smeared under your arms. Effective, marginally, popular, eventually. But in your current 1850s timeline, Mum is still just something you cry out for when you catch a whiff of yourself after walking uphill for 10 minutes. And now for a particularly weird fringe belief. Some Victorians thought sweat was a sign of emotional instability. If you perspired excessively, especially as a woman, it was a symptom of nervousness, hysteria, or weak moral character. There were even dubious medical treatments to reduce it, including belladonna-based tinctures, which are poisonous by the way, and terrifying proto-electrical devices that allegedly strengthen the will. Because nothing says fresh and confident like being mildly electrocuted for your armpit sins. But even among the more rational crowd, the idea of daily sweat control just doesn't have traction yet. Part of that is practical. Laundry's a nightmare, and most garments, especially for women, are multi-layered nightmares that trap heat and moisture like a mobile terrarium. Another part of it is philosophical. Victorians are deeply suspicious of vanity. If you're too focused on your scent, people assume you're trying to attract attention. The bad kind. You duck into a tailor's shop and nearly gag. The man fitting waistcoats at the counter is wearing a jacket that probably hasn't seen daylight, let alone soap, in a year. You catch the mingling aromas of sweat, starch, and something that smells like rotting radish. He smiles broadly and gestures to the racks of woolen trousers behind him. You smile back, breathing through your mouth. Now, to his credit, the tailor might own a grooming brush. He might sprinkle talcum or alum powder under his arms in the morning. Alum was one of the earliest sweat reducers, an astringent mineral that tightens skin and minimises perspiration. But he's not stopping sweat. He's just trying to keep from soaking his cravat before lunch. For those a little higher up the social ladder, the hygiene routine is more involved, but still deodorant-free. Gentlemen carry handkerchiefs saturated in cologne. Ladies may change their chemises, that's the layer worn closest to the skin, more often than their outer clothes. But the underlying assumption remains: the body should sweat. It's healthy. It purifies the blood. It keeps you grounded in your own working-class nobility, even if you happen to be rich. Of course, there are scholars who point out that Victorians did care deeply about how they smelled. They just didn't connect it to health in the way we do now. They saw bad smells as signs of decay and sin, sure, but not necessarily personal sin. More like, the neighbourhood is morally diseased than, you forgot to put on deodorant. And since germ theory was still in its infancy, people didn't realise that the stench of an unwashed human could also mean bacteria were partying on your skin. As you leave the shop and head toward the city's edge, you pass a row of bathhouses, all closed today, a perfume vendor hawking cheap musk oil, and a woman airing out her underclothes in the open air. She's holding a linen chemise out like a flag, waving it gently to shake out the stiffness. You try not to think about how long it's been since it was washed, or worn, or both. Even in high society, sweat management is more about illusion than elimination. Queen Victoria herself had special perfumers. Her favourite scent was reportedly a mix of orange blossom and violet, but there's no record of her using anything to stop sweat itself. The palace would have relied on good ventilation, heavy use of linen, and the occasional desperate splash of rosewater in the right places. Meanwhile, you're starting to feel the creeping dampness beneath your own layers. Wool trousers are great insulators, also great at trapping moisture. There's no breeze, no deodorant stick in your pocket. Just the slowly building awareness that your morning optimism is evaporating, literally, into the folds of your shirt. You stop by a chemist's stall and ask, half joking, if there's anything to keep a gentleman fresh. The man behind the counter offers you a small jar of alum powder and a vial of lavender oil. Mix. The two, he says, apply with a cloth. Avoid the eyes. You thank him and leave with your new anti-odour toolkit clinking in your coat pocket, feeling like a pioneer of freshness. Back home you try it. Not bad, not good, but not bad. The alum stings slightly, but the lavender is almost pleasant. For a moment you feel like you've cracked the Victorian Hygiene code, until you realise it's already time to start sweating again. But hey, small wins. You're starting to realise that in Victorian England, your body isn't really yours. It's a walking collection of unspoken expectations, strange fabrics, and near religious devotion to layers. And nowhere is this more obvious, or more horrifying, than in the world of undergarments. Not that anyone calls them that. To your current companions, these are unmentionables, and trust me, they'd prefer you didn't. This morning, after your lavender-scented Allume experiment, which, to be honest, was about 60% sting and 40% delusion, you decide to change your clothes, a reasonable plan. But as you start layering up, it dawns on you just how absurd Victorian underwear truly is. Let's start with the basics. If you're a woman, and tonight for a moment we're climbing into a corseted nightmare, you begin with a chemise. It's a long, loose cotton shift worn next to the skin, which serves two purposes: to absorb sweat and body oils, and to protect the expensive outer garments from you. Washing dresses is a huge ordeal. Washing a chemise? Still a chore, but a bit less ruinous. So naturally you own exactly two of them. Maybe three if you're lucky. Over that you add drawers. basically crotchless bloomers, because bathroom logistics are hard enough when you're wearing 5 layers and a skirt that could smother a donkey. Yes, you heard that right. Crotchless. This isn't scandalous, it's just practical. And cold. Definitely cold. Next comes the corset made of stiffened fabric and sometimes actual whalebone. You pull it tight, tighter, tighter still. Not for fashion, well, okay, partially for fashion, but mostly because it's considered good posture and good breeding to have a waist that can snap a man in half. Breathing is optional, internal organ alignment is theoretical. Then it's the petticoats, multiple petticoats. In winter it's like wearing a down comforter wrapped in scaffolding. In summer it's slow, sweaty punishment. And all of this is your underwear. You haven't even put on your actual outfit yet. If you're a man, things aren't much better. You start with a long flannel undershirt, usually itchy, always beige, and a pair of long drawers tied at the waist with a string that hasn't been replaced since Waterloo. You don't change these often. They absorb everything. Everything. And when they finally do get laundered, it's an all-day ordeal involving boiling water, lye soap, and possibly divine intervention. Now, for your historical fact, Victorian hygiene manuals advised men and women alike to change their underclothes once a week. If that sounds shockingly infrequent, congratulations, you're alive in the 21st century. But at the time, that weekly change was considered a mark of good health and modern sensibility. Some reformers even pushed for a twice-a-week change, but people accused them of being extremists, wild radicals, soap anarchists. And here's a particularly juicy fringe fact. Queen Victoria reportedly insisted on wearing clean white cotton bloomers daily, and she expected her ladies-in-waiting to do the same. While most of the nation was fermenting slowly in their woolen long johns, the royal bloomers were laundered daily and kept in pristine condition. There's even a surviving pair in a museum. Let that image follow you to sleep. But the reality for most people is very different. Underclothes are precious. They're handed down, repaired, patched, stained beyond memory. For many, laundry day is once a week, and underthings are the last to get priority. Who's going to see them? And if someone does, you've got bigger problems than hygiene. Now here comes the debate. Were Victorians disgustingly unwashed, or just doing their best with what they had? Some scholars argue that daily undergarment changes were practiced among the middle class, especially by women who had domestic help. Others say that's a romanticized version of history written by people who never scrubbed soot out of drawers in January. In truth, the habits varied wildly by region, income, gender, and the sheer willingness to endure damp laundry drying by a fireplace. Back in your little rented room, you stare at your own drawers, greyish, stiff from wear, and desperately needing attention. You decide to brave the laundry basin and start scrubbing with the leftover lye soap from the last wash. It burns. It smells vaguely like old meat and regret, but it foams, sort of. After 15 minutes of scraping, your knuckles are red and your dignity is bruised, but the underclothes look marginally improved. Victory. You hang them by the fire, knowing they'll be stiff as boards by morning. Ironically, clean drawers are often less comfortable than dirty ones. You dress in your backup pair, slightly damp, eternally suspicious, and start layering the rest of your outfit. A woman across the alley is doing the same. You catch a glimpse through her cracked window. Pale cotton chemise, corset cords being pulled tight by another woman, with the grim expression of someone hoisting cargo on a ship. The younger woman sags forward, exhales, and then straightens with visible effort. The entire process takes 15 minutes. She hasn't even put on her stockings yet. You walk down the street now fully dressed, but with the growing awareness that you're sweating through your layers already. The wool trousers itch. The flannel shirt sticks. Your drawers have shifted in a way you can only describe as hostile. It's 9 a.m. You pass a line of factory workers waiting to punch in. The smell of 100 humans layered in old flannel is impressive. Not quite offensive, just intensely present. Everyone pretends not to notice. You wonder how many of them are on their third day in the same underclothes. Probably all of them. The scent of stale sweat, smoke and old fabric has become the smell of life here. It clings to staircases, hangs in airless parlours, drifts down from the balconies of music halls. Even the perfume doesn't mask it. It just swirls with it, creating a heady fog of roses, mildew and unspoken suffering. Back home, you collapse into a chair and peel off your boots. Your feet sigh with relief. You wonder if your underclothes will ever be truly dry. You wonder if anyone has ever actually liked wearing flannel, but deep down, you're adapting. The itch is familiar. The stiffness, expected. You're learning to navigate your day with the quiet confidence of someone whose drawers haven't been washed in a socially acceptable number of days. You're Victorian now, and you smell like it. You're walking through the market square, doing your best to ignore the way your flannel underwear is fused to your skin in an act of slow rebellion when something darts across your vision. Tiny, fast, and very much alive. You pause, you scratch your scalp, you pause again. Oh no. Welcome to the itchy, twitchy world of Victorian head hygiene, where lice are less of a problem and more of a cultural norm. Everyone has them. Not just the poor, not just the children. Everyone. You've got royal nits, aristocratic lice, well-bred bugs nestled into top hats and tiaras, and unless you've shaved your head or have access to a personal maid with a knit comb and the patience of a saint, there's a good chance something is crawling through your hair right now. You head toward the river, hoping a brisk breeze might distract you, but all it does is blow your hair into your eyes, and now you're hyper-aware of every tickle on your scalp. Is that a stray strand? Or a moving creature? You scratch again. This is your life now. The truth is, Victorian hair care is complicated. Shampoo, as we know it, doesn't exist yet. The word is borrowed from India, shampoo, meaning to massage. But it won't mean anything close to squeeze bottle with coconut-scented lather for another 80 years. Most people clean their hair with soap, if at all, and soap on hair is like dish detergent on a silk blouse. It strips oils, makes your scalp angry, and turns your curls into something resembling horse straw. So instead of washing, people brush. A lot. You might brush your hair 100 strokes a night, not to smooth it, but to redistribute oils from scalp to tip. It's like conditioning, except you're using your own built-in grease as product. If you've ever skipped washing your hair for 4 days and thought, it's getting kind of glossy, congratulations, you're one pomade away from full Victorian. And here's your historical fact for the day. Hair powder was still hanging around during the early Victorian years, a leftover from the Georgian period. Men and women alike would dust their hair with white powder, originally made from wheat starch, sometimes laced with perfume. It wasn't about colour, it was about covering up grease and masking odour. Plus, it gave a kind of matte, stately look, like your head had been carved from dusty marble. Of course, by mid-century that trend was out. People saw powdered wigs as old-fashioned and overly French, but some older folks clung to the habit like a comfort blanket made of chalk. You might still spot an old barrister with hair so pale it looks haunted. That's powder, not age. Now let's get into wigs. You're probably imagining something massive and curly, powdered into oblivion, but Victorian wigs were generally more understated. More hairpieces than full wigs. False buns, rolls, braids, attached with pins or tied with ribbons. Why? Because real hair took effort, and the alternative was constantly being at war with your own head. Here's your fringe fact. Some Victorian women wore rats. No, not actual rats, though given the era it wouldn't be that surprising, but bundles of their own shed hair, collected from brushes and saved in little fabric pouches. These were used to pad hairstyles, add volume, or support elaborate updos. Imagine hoarding your hair in a drawer for 6 months just to sew it into your next look. It's dedication. It's also deeply unsettling. Back to the lice. There were 2 main approaches, the comb and the poison. The knit comb was a fine-toothed metal instrument of pure frustration. It worked eventually, if you had the time and weren't too tender-headed. But the poison, usually a mercury-based ointment or vinegar rinse, was faster and dangerous. Mercury, of course, is toxic. It could cause tremors, hallucinations, and slow, permanent damage. But hey, no more lice. There's ongoing debate among historians about just how common infestations were. Some records suggest it was constant. Others argue that the better off managed to avoid it with regular brushing and linen changes. But the truth probably lies somewhere in between. Even middle-class homes could host lice, especially if they employed help who lived in tight quarters. And children. They were basically walking louse farms. It was part of growing up. You find a shady bench beneath a tree and sit down to rest, brushing your fingers through your hair out of habit. The feeling isn't awful, but it's not reassuring either. You remember the old trick, comb your hair over white paper and see what falls out. You decide not to try that right now. Some mysteries are better left unresolved. You watch as a woman walks by, her hair tucked neatly under a bonnet. Bonnets were more than fashion. They were protective headgear. They kept dust out, kept hair in, place and reduced exposure to both sun and scrutiny. Men, meanwhile, stuck to hats. Bowler, top, straw, depending on their station. These too were lice magnets. Warm, dark, fabric-lined havens. If you were particularly unlucky, you might even get body lice hiding in the seams of your hatband. The hairbrush was a status symbol, oddly enough. The richer you were, the more likely you had one made of fine boar bristles, maybe with a silver handle. The poor made do with fingers, rags, or nothing at all. And if you had a maid, her primary job, especially if you were a woman, might be brushing your hair for 20 minutes every night. That wasn't vanity, that was basic scalp survival. Back at home, you rummage through your things and find a small comb. You work it through your hair in slow, deliberate strokes. It's gritty. Tangles pull tight, then snap free. A few strands fall to the floor. You think about starting your own rat collection, just for the experience. When you're done, your scalp feels sore and tender, but the itch has lessened. Not gone, never gone, but dulled. Maybe it's psychosomatic. Maybe it's just your brain getting tired of panicking. You wrap a scarf around your head, not just for fashion, but as a barrier between you and whatever else might be drifting through the air. Lice, dust, soot, hope, all equally likely. You step outside again, hair tamed, comb in your pocket like a talisman. You're not clean, exactly, but you're slightly more in control, which, in this era, might be the best you can hope for. The scarf tied around your head is doing a fine job of pretending things are under control. You look almost fashionable, even a little mysterious. But as you stroll through the brick corridors of your neighbourhood, you notice something pungent. Not from the air, though, let's be clear, the air hasn't been innocent in weeks, but from inside a nearby home. A heavy clanging sound follows, metal against ceramic, and then a sloshing noise you immediately regret recognising. You know what time it is. Chamber pot time. Victorian toilets, or the painful lack thereof, are one of those details history books like to gloss over in favour of ball gowns and horse-drawn carriages. But make no mistake, for every gleaming ballroom, there's a dark corner with a jug, a pot, and a very confused idea of plumbing. You find yourself wandering toward the rear alley behind a boarding house. It's early enough that the residents haven't yet dumped their nightly offerings into the gutter. You see the signs, though. Flies, puddles, and that particular scent that hangs in the throat. A woman in her dressing gown steps out with a ceramic pot, its lid trembling as she shuffles toward the curb. She tips it into the trench running along the street, and there it goes. Everything from last night's ale to this morning's regret. This is the reality. Indoor plumbing is a privilege, not a right. For most Victorians, the bathroom is a chamber pot kept under the bed. Some are ornately painted and part of a matched washstand set. Others are metal, tin or clay. But they all serve the same purpose. You do your business in the privacy of your own room, then hope someone else deals with it before the next guest comes calling. And then there's the thunder mug, a nickname for chamber pots with handles usually made of pewter or thick china and used at night so you didn't have to stumble down 4 flights of stairs in the dark. The thunder, by the way, refers to the unmistakable sound it makes when placed back down on a wooden floor. You might as well announce to the whole house that you've just relieved yourself, you might be asking. But wait, weren't there outhouses? Yes, in the back garden. Freezing in winter, sweltering in summer, and almost universally horrifying year-round. A trip to the outhouse was less a bathroom break and more a test of courage and bladder discipline. They were often shared by multiple families barely maintained, and full of things no living person should see at close range. If you were unlucky, you'd encounter the dreaded night soil man, a real job, who collected human waste from outdoor privies to sell as fertiliser. Yes, really. Here's your historical fact. In many urban areas of London during the mid-1800s, human waste was still collected in cesspools, underground tanks dug behind or beneath buildings. These were meant to be cleaned out periodically, but in practice they overflowed. Often. One estimate from the 1840s suggests that more than 200,000 cesspools were active in London alone. You read that right. 200,000 glorified holes filled with decomposing filth. For a particularly unsettling fringe fact, some households reused urine. Not for pranks, but for cleaning. Human urine contains ammonia, which, before synthetic cleaners, was actually useful for scrubbing stains or whitening linens. The name for it? Chamber lye. Housewives and laundresses might collect it in jugs and use it as part of their wash day routine. So yes, your trousers might be starched with someone's recycled bathroom break. You pass a row of homes where a boy is carrying a sloshing bucket toward the curb. He doesn't look ashamed, just bored. This is his chore. He might have 10 more buckets to go. You step aside politely and give him a nod. He nods back. Etiquette still lives, even if the sanitation doesn't. Now, let's address the actual toilets. Yes, some do exist. By the late 19th century, flush toilets are becoming more common among the upper class, and even the middle class in fancier neighbourhoods. They're called water closets, or WCs. If you're fancy, you've got a high-tank pull chain system with a porcelain bowl and enough brass fixtures to make you feel royal while you go. But that's not your world yet. That's an upgrade still decades away for most. In poorer parts of the city, a shared privy might be the only option. You could find yourself waiting in line behind a neighbour and then sitting on a damp wooden seat above a pit so deep it echoes. There are no lights, there are no flushes. There is, however, a communal newspaper nailed to the wall, used not for reading. You get the idea. You head back home, suddenly grateful for your own small chamber pot. It's chipped, it smells like rust and embarrassment, but at least it's yours, and in this world, privacy is more precious than comfort. You lift the lid, wince slightly, and decide to empty it while the street is still quiet. Carrying it outside is a balancing act. One wrong step, and you're not just cleaning your shoes, you're rethinking your life. But you manage. You find the slop trench, a shallow, curved groove running along the side of the cobblestone street. It's where everyone dumps everything. Dishwater, bathwater, animal waste, human waste, rain runoff, and possibly someone's entire lunch from 2 days ago. The city's lifeblood, if your blood was 80% bacteria and sadness. You pour, rinse with a half dip from the pump, and shuffle back inside. The entire process takes under 5 minutes, but it leaves you feeling older, tired, slightly haunted. This is the part of history people tend to skip in novels. You'll get pages of silk gloves and tea parties, but never the scene where the heroine nearly drops her thunder mug on the stairs. But this is the truth. Victorians didn't have bathrooms. They had nerve, grit, a well-developed sense of smell, and a tolerance for daily grossness that would send a modern soul running for bleach. You wash your hands with a rag and some soap you found under the washstand. It smells faintly of lavender, mostly of damp wood, but it helps, sort of. You dry off and sit back down on your bed, a little lighter, a little wiser, and very much aware that you are one accidental nudge away from dumping your secrets all over the floor. Still, you're surviving. Barely, and that's enough for today. You wake up in the middle of the night to a familiar, unholy scent seeping in through the window, and for a second you think, did someone forget to empty the chamber pot again? But no, this isn't homegrown. This is something far worse. Something collective. Something national. You peel back the curtain, squinting into the moonlight, and there it is, rising off the River Thames like a ghost made entirely of sewage. It's the Great Stink, and you're living in the middle of it. Let's set the scene. It's the summer of 1858, and London is experiencing a heatwave that could broil pigeons mid-flight. The air is thick, sticky, and buzzing with flies. The Thames, which snakes through the heart of the city, has officially given up trying to pass as a river and is now auditioning for the role of the world's largest open sewer. The water is brown, chunky, and bubbling ominously. Fish are floating belly up. Everything smells like rotting meat dipped in death and reheated in a chimney. You lean out of the window and gag. The odour is indescribable, acrid, sour, chemical, organic, and somehow hot. It clings to your clothes, slides up your nostrils, and lingers at the back of your throat like a cruel joke that just keeps getting told. You duck back inside, cover your mouth with a handkerchief, and consider never breathing again. But here's the thing, you're not alone. Everyone in London is suffering. The Great Stink isn't just unpleasant, it's historic. The entire city is reeling. Parliament, located conveniently near the river, is practically shut down. Lawmakers are soaking their curtains in lime chloride and dabbing their upper lips with cologne just to function for 5 minutes at a time. One paper describes the stench as the most ghastly phenomenon to ever assail the human nose, which frankly undersells it. Time for a little history. London's sewage system in the mid-1800s is, in a word, medieval. Waste from houses flows directly into the Thames. Some goes through open ditches, some sits in cesspools until it overflows. And when it rains, or worse, when it doesn't, the whole mess either floods or bakes in place. By the time 1858 rolls around, the build-up of excrement, industrial waste and slaughterhouse runoff has reached catastrophic levels, and then the temperature spikes. This is when everything turns aromatic. You stumble downstairs, your scarf tied tightly over your face like you're planning a Victorian train robbery. The smell's worse down here. It's rising through the floorboards. People are stuffing cracks in their windows with newspaper, hanging soaked bed sheets over doorways, doing anything to keep the air out. Nothing works. You could bottle this air and use it as a weapon. Outside, it's no better. The Thames is literally visible from your street, and what used to be a greyish flow is now a thick, slow ooze. Steam rises off the surface like it's been heated from below by the devil's personal kettle. You watch as a small dog tries to drink from the edge. It immediately thinks better of it and flees. Here's your fringe fact for the evening. Some entrepreneurial Victorians tried to sell Thames water as a curative. That's right. Bottled river sludge was marketed as a health tonic. They claimed it strengthened the constitution, gave you robust energy, and possibly cured scurvy. In reality, it gave you dysentery, or worse. But it sold well. Because people will drink almost anything if you say it came from nature and charge them for it. You cough into your sleeve and stagger toward the embankment. You're not sure why. Morbid curiosity, maybe. Or maybe you just want to see what the end of modern sanitation looks like up close. The street is nearly empty. Even the drunks are indoors. But you spot a man from the local council pacing back and forth with a notebook and a handkerchief tied over his face like a surgeon on laundry day. You overhear him muttering about intercepting sewers and Bazalgette's plan. That's Joseph Bazalgette, the hero of this particular horror story. A civil engineer with the patience of a saint and the stomach of a grave digger. After years of begging for a new sewage system, he finally gets the green light, because the stench is so bad that Parliament literally cannot function. Nothing says urgency like lawmakers choking on their own city. Bazalgette's plan: massive underground tunnels to carry sewage away from the city and out to the sea. A grand, ambitious, expensive project that will take years to complete, but it will work, eventually. For now, though, you're still stuck living in the olfactory apocalypse. There's a scholarly debate about just how bad the Great Stink actually was. Some suggest that the newspapers exaggerated it to push reform. Others argue that no language could capture the full horror. Eyewitness accounts describe people vomiting in the streets, cloths permanently soaked in vinegar, and entire neighbourhoods abandoning ship for the countryside. Whatever the case, it changed the city forever. London would never again ignore its waste so enthusiastically. You stagger back home, every breath a punishment. You try lighting a candle, hoping it will cut through the smell. It doesn't. If anything, it bakes the stink into the walls. You consider dunking your head in rosewater, or absinthe, or both. Instead, you retreat to your bed and pull the covers over your face like a coward. A sensible, survival-minded coward. Your dreams are vivid and unpleasant. Rivers made of soup, fish with human eyes, lawmakers rowing through sludge in powdered wigs, trying to read bills that dissolve in their hands. You wake up coughing and sweating, not sure whether it's the heat, the stink, or the lingering ghost of Thames water nightmares. Morning comes, and the air hasn't changed. If anything, it's heavier, thicker. You can feel the stink now. It has weight, texture. It sits on your chest like an unwanted pet. People are walking around with scarves tied like mourning bands. Not for a person, but for their noses. You try to eat breakfast, but can't. The bread tastes like sewage. The tea smells like boiled river. You push the plate away and sit there, dizzy. The Great Stink has officially invaded your life. You hear distant church bells. Maybe they're tolling for the death of your sense of smell, or maybe it's just Sunday. Hard to say. But there's one bright spot. Change is coming. Real change. The city can't ignore this forever. Plans are moving, brick is being laid. Sewers are about to become the greatest architectural achievement of the century. You just have to survive the smell a little longer. You've spent the better part of the week dodging puddles that should come with a warning label, and waking each morning in a room scented like a failed experiment in human endurance. So naturally it makes sense that you now turn your attention to something far more delicate: Victorian skincare and beauty. Don't laugh. You may be living in a time where soap is optional and hot water is seasonal, but appearances still matter. And for women especially, beauty isn't a luxury. It's an expectation with terrifying side effects. You visit a local chemist shop, the kind that sells everything from dried herbs to rat poison. On the shelves, nestled between a tin of pastilles and a bottle of hair tonic, promising to restore vigour and moral balance, are the beauty products. Small glass jars, opaque bottles, packets wrapped in lace. They look charming, harmless even. You pick one up, it's labelled Madame Swinton's Pearl Face Cream. Romantic, dainty, absolutely lethal. Because here's the Victorian skincare plot twist. A lot of what's supposed to make you beautiful is slowly trying to kill you. That pearl cream? It's mostly lead. The face powder with that perfect porcelain finish? Also lead. Lip tints, mercury, eyelash darkeners, coal tar. Being beautiful in this era is basically a slow-motion science experiment where the control group is already 6 feet under. You pause and gently put the jar back. Across the room, a woman is speaking with the shopkeeper about her pimples, a word whispered like it might summon the devil. He offers her a bottle of carbolic acid diluted in rosewater. You internally scream. She thanks him and hands over a coin with a trembling smile. Skincare in this world walks a tightrope between elegance and horror. Here's your historical fact. One of the most popular beauty products of the era was Laird's Bloom of Youth, a liquid foundation made with white lead and vinegar. It promised to smooth the skin, erase blemishes, and give you that ghostly pallor so prized in polite society. It also caused lead poisoning, which had side effects like headaches, abdominal pain, muscle paralysis, and, in especially unlucky cases, death. But hey, your cheeks were stunningly matte. The ideal Victorian woman had skin like fine porcelain, pale, unblemished, and utterly bloodless. Sun-kissed was for milkmaids and peasants. A lady of class avoided the sun like it owed her money. Parasols, wide-brimmed hats, gloves and veils were all employed to keep the skin deathly white. A tan meant you worked outdoors, and that was, socially speaking, equivalent to being seen eating bread in the street with your mouth open. So what if you were born with freckles or ruddy cheeks? You were cursed, but not helpless. There were creams and tonics for that, some with arsenic, some with belladonna, others with ingredients that were never fully disclosed. One, blemish balm, promised to remove skin imperfections and unladylike blotches with a single application. It also removed several layers of your skin. And now your fringe fact. Some women mix beeswax with lard and a dash of flour to create a homemade foundation. It was applied in thick layers, then set, with powdered starch or dried rice flour. The result? A face that didn't move. Not ideal if you're planning to smile, but excellent for scaring away suitors you weren't actually interested in. Scholars still argue about how many Victorian women actually used lead-based makeup daily. Some say it was more common among actresses and courtesans than the average housewife. Others suggest it was widespread, especially in upper-middle-class homes where appearances were everything. What's clear is that beauty was never just about looking nice. It was about status, marriage prospects, and respectability. You weren't just applying powder, you were applying hope. You leave the shop and head toward the park, watching as a pair of women pass you under a shared parasol. Their cheeks are dusted with pale powder, their lips pinched into tight little smiles. They smell faintly of violets and vinegar. You wonder how many layers of cream and perfume it takes to keep up the illusion. You wonder if they know what's in their jars. Maybe they do. Maybe it's a choice between slow poisoning or social invisibility. Back in your room, you decide to try your own version of Victorian skincare. You have a bowl of lukewarm rainwater, a piece of soft cloth, and a tiny sample of rose-cold cream you swiped from the chemist's as a souvenir. You dip the cloth and gently wipe your face. It feels okay. Slightly slimy, fragrant in a way that makes you think of overly perfumed letters and forgotten closets. You apply the cold cream. It sits on your skin like a thin film of sadness. But your cheeks feel soft, maybe a little too soft. You glance at your reflection in the cracked mirror. You look exactly the same, maybe slightly shinier. Still, you understand now. The cream, the powder, the rituals, they're about control. In a world where you can't count on clean water, or working toilets, or even breathable air, applying a bit of scented paste to your face feels like staking a claim. A quiet little rebellion against filth. You may not own much, but you can own your skin, at least until the mercury kicks in. The next day, you watch a woman in the market reapply powder using a compact mirror. She taps the puff against her cheeks, closes the lid, and smiles at no one in particular. Her hands are stained from the dye she uses on her gloves. Her eyes are red-rimmed, but for a moment she looks invincible, like she's holding herself together one dusting at a time. You walk past her, your face bare but clean. The sun is high. You flinch. You should probably get a hat. You stand in front of a narrow mirror propped against the wall of a barber shop, squinting through a haze of shaving soap, coal smoke and pipe tobacco. The mirror's surface is so scratched and foggy it feels less like a tool and more like a challenge. You're here because your stubble has declared mutiny, and if Victorian England excels at anything, other than body lice and polite repression, it's the elaborate and occasionally lethal ritual of men's grooming. The barber, a man with a waxed moustache and the steady, calloused hands of someone who's held both scissors and secrets, waves you into his chair. You sit. The chair creaks beneath your weight. The leather cracked, the arms shiny with generations of anxiety. He drapes a stained cloth over your shoulders and tightens it at the neck until you can barely swallow. You're now at his mercy. First comes the warm towel, soaked in water that was just this side of boiling 10 minutes ago, and slapped across your face with a force that implies both efficiency and mild aggression. It's surprisingly soothing. The steam opens your pores, softens your scruff, and temporarily mutes the noise from outside. You're cocooned in warmth and wet linen. It lasts 15 seconds. Then the towel is yanked off with the same violence that started it. He dips a brush into a ceramic bowl filled with shaving soap and begins whipping it into a foamy lather. Victorian shaving soap is hard as a rock, fragrant with bay, cloves, and something vaguely medicinal. The foam smells like the kind of cologne you'd imagine a pirate might wear to court. With practiced motions, he paints your face. It's oddly intimate, being lathered by a stranger while trying not to flinch. Now comes the razor. A straight razor. No safety bar. No disposable blade. No vibrating nonsense. Just a piece of finely honed steel sharpened on a leather strop and gleaming in the low light. He holds it up like a priest about to offer communion, then leans in. And this, right here, is the most Victorian experience you can have, placing your throat in the hands of a man who sharpens knives for a living and hoping for the best. Let's get into the historical fact. In the mid-1800s, shaving was a serious operation. Most men didn't shave themselves, at least not regularly. Razors were expensive, temperamental, and easy to misuse. One wrong angle and you'd be explaining to your doctor, or undertaker, how you mistook your jugular for your jawline, so unless you were particularly brave or dangerously cheap, you went to the barber. Barbershops weren't just grooming salons, they were social hubs. Men gathered here to talk politics, drink weak tea, argue about trade routes, or speculate about the Queen's digestion. In some shops, you could even get a haircut, a shave, and a tooth pulled all in the same chair, though you probably didn't want to go last. Here's your fringe fact. Many barbers also sold hair pomade made from bear fat. Yes, actual bear fat. It was believed to promote hair growth and give your style that fashionable glossy finish. Alternatives included lard, macassar oil, a thick floral goop that stained everything it touched, and petroleum jelly. Your head was less a hairstyle and more a self-contained oil spill. Back in the chair, the blade touches your cheek. The first stroke is slow, deliberate. He stretches the skin, taut with his thumb, and scrapes the razor downward in tiny clean swipes. You hold your breath. He doesn't cut you, yet. The tension is spiritual. Victorian barbers were judged by the smoothness of their shave and the number of clients who left unbleeding. Many trained through apprenticeships, working under master barbers who taught them how to handle razors, mix tonics, and engage in appropriate gentlemanly banter. Today's barber is mostly silent, save for the occasional grunt of approval or the sharp exhale when he encounters a patch of particularly rebellious whiskers. You glance at the wall. Hanging beside the strop is a poster advertising Dr. Thistle's hair revitalising elixir for baldness, dandruff and melancholy. Below it, a smaller sign reads, "Caution, do not apply to open wounds." You nod, wisely. The shave continues. Your cheeks are smooth now. He tilts your head, stretches the skin beneath your jaw and works the blade along your neck. You can hear the scrape of steel against stubble. You can feel the pulse in your throat. You think about every bad decision you've ever made. You promise God you'll never complain about electric razors again. After the final pass, he wipes your face with another hot towel, then douses your cheeks with an aftershave that smells like pine needles, gin and grief. It burns. You flinch. He chuckles. Let's talk haircuts. Victorian men favoured short, tidy styles with names like the Caesar, the Brutus, or the natural flow. Sides were neat, parts were severe, and the top was slicked back or waved into place with oil and pomade. Beards came and went in popularity. In the 1850s, beards were symbols of masculinity and wisdom. By the 1880s, clean-shaven faces made a comeback, inspired by royal fashion and sanitary concerns. Scholars still debate the true motivations behind Victorian grooming trends. Some say it was about cleanliness. As cities grew, so did concerns about lice and disease, and shorter hair made hygiene more manageable. Others argue it was about identity. Facial hair especially became a statement. A thick beard said you were a philosopher. A handlebar moustache? Possibly a cavalry officer. A clean face? Likely a banker. Or a man who couldn't grow a beard and wanted to hide it with moral superiority. The barber pats your face dry and holds up a mirror. You look sharp. Your cheeks are pink from the shave. Your chin is smooth. And for once, you don't look like you've been dragged backward through a hay cart. You tip the man a coin, maybe two, and step outside into the street. The breeze hits your freshly shaved skin like a cool slap from an angel. You breathe in, and for once, you smell like bay leaves instead of despair. It won't last. The coal smoke will cling to you again within the hour, and the pomade will start to melt as soon as you break a sweat. But for now, you feel presentable. You pass another barbershop a few blocks down. Inside, a man is getting a haircut while his son watches, wide-eyed, from a wooden bench. It's a rite of passage here, sitting still while someone with a blade navigates your face like it's a hostile map. One wrong turn and you get a scar. Two wrong turns and you get a funeral. But when it's done right, you get dignity. And in this world, that's the closest thing to luxury. The problem with cleanliness in the Victorian world isn't just getting clean, it's keeping things clean. After your recent trip to the barbershop where you barely escaped with your chin intact and a reasonable amount of blood in your body, you feel emboldened, groomed, refined. But then you glance down at your shirt, streaked with soot. Your cuffs, frayed and suspiciously crunchy, and your socks. You don't even want to talk about them. It's time to face the beast that lurks behind every respectable home and humble tenement, laundry day. If you thought bathing was inconvenient, get ready. Laundry in Victorian England isn't a chore, it's a full contact sport. For most households it happens once a week, often on a Monday, and it takes the entire day, literally, dawn to dusk. You don't just toss things in a machine and scroll through recipes for beetroot pudding while they spin. Number you boil, beat, scrub, wring, hang, freeze, iron, and weep. Often all at once. You begin in the scullery, a small stone-floored room behind the kitchen, designed for messy work and eternal damp. There's a heavy copper tub built into the corner, stained with a century of soap and suffering. You light the fire beneath it, carefully, because the flue is unpredictable, and the smoke has a habit of curling up into your face like an affectionate cat. The water takes nearly an hour to heat. During this time, you sort clothes into piles, whites, darks, woolens, and mystery items. The latter includes socks so far gone they may be eligible for sainthood. Here's your historical fact. Most Victorians used a homemade soap mixture of animal fat and lye, sometimes with soda crystals thrown in for good measure. This stuff is strong enough to strip paint, never mind stains. It burns your hands, stings your eyes, and turns delicate fabric into something resembling a ship's sail. But it works, at least in the sense that it transforms dirty laundry into slightly less dirty laundry. You dunk the first batch into the copper and begin stirring with a long wooden paddle, not unlike a witch preparing stew. Steam fills the room. The smell is intense. Hot lye, wet wool, and the ghost of every dinner ever spilled on a lap. As you stir, bits of lint and unidentified gunk rise to the surface like offerings. You skim them off with a slotted spoon. You're officially an alchemist of grime. Next comes the rubbing board, a ridged metal sheet set at an angle in a large basin. You take a shirt, already soaked, and begin scrubbing. Back and forth, back and forth. Your knuckles turn red, your wrists ache. The shirt doesn't thank you, it just lays there, sullen and unimpressed. Once scrubbed, the clothes must be wrung out. If you're lucky, you have a hand-cranked mangle, 2 heavy rollers that press water from fabric like a medieval torture device for linens. If you're not lucky, you twist the clothes by hand until your arms feel like overcooked noodles. Either way, the result is the same. Dripping piles of damp fabric that now need to be hung out to dry. Except it's winter, and this is England. So your backyard line is coated in frost and the air feels like soup that someone forgot to warm. You hang the clothes anyway, using wooden pegs that snap if you so much as look at them wrong. The clothes freeze almost immediately. By afternoon, your shirts resemble medieval battle flags, stiff, flapping in the breeze, and full of unresolved trauma. Here's your fringe fact. Some Victorians believed that hanging laundry on a Sunday, especially women's underthings, was not only improper but borderline immoral. There are stories of neighbours reporting each other to local parishes for the scandal of a visible petticoat drying in the yard on the Lord's Day. Even laundry had a moral compass. Back inside, the air is thick with steam. The windows weep with condensation. Your skin feels damp in ways that aren't entirely temperature-related. You set about the ironing, a hellish chore that involves a solid iron heated on the stove and no temperature control whatsoever. If it's too cold, it does nothing. If it's too hot, it scorches your best blouse and leaves a ghostly print of its own design burned into the fabric forever. You press collars, cuffs, hems. Your fingers sting. You smell vaguely of scorched cotton and despair. There's no satisfaction, only completion. And even that is temporary, because next week you'll do it all again. There's ongoing debate among scholars about who actually did the laundry in most homes. Middle-class families often had laundresses, sometimes live-in servants, sometimes women who collected clothes weekly and returned them clean, red, less filthy. For working-class families it was the wife's job, or the eldest daughter's, or anyone who could still lift a wash basin without weeping. It was unpaid, thankless, and physically exhausting work, often performed under freezing conditions with no gloves and zero appreciation. As you fold the final shirt, crispy, oddly shaped, but at least clean, you look around the room. Water everywhere. The floor is soaked. The washstand looks like it's aged 10 years. You feel like you've aged 10 years. But your basket is full of fresh-ish clothes, and you're reasonably certain your socks no longer have ecosystems of their own. You hang the last of the damp garments by the fireplace, hoping the coal heat will dry them before mildew sets in. Outside you can see other homes with clotheslines swinging gently in the breeze. Neighbours have been at it. Since sunrise, you exchange tired nods. A shared acknowledgement of mutual suffering. Laundry solidarity. And yet there's a strange kind of peace in it. Something rhythmic about the scrub, the steam, the repetitive muscle burn. It's awful, yes, but it's also meditative in a way only truly thankless work can be. You know every wrinkle in your garments, every rip, every stitch, every stubborn stain that defied the soap. You fought your clothes and won, barely, and now you get to wear them into battle against the rest of Victorian filth all over again. You sit by the fire, sipping weak tea, your hands raw and red. You're tired in your bones, but your shirt is clean, and in this city, that might just be enough to make you feel human. It's ironic, really. After surviving a week of scrubbing your own laundry with medieval instruments and experimental soap, you'd think there might be some comfort in knowing professionals are out there handling the truly dirty work, like medicine. But then you remember you're in Victorian England, and the word professional has a very broad definition. Today, you're visiting a hospital. Not as a patient, thankfully, but give it a week. These boots haven't dried properly in 3 days, and you're already coughing like a character with limited screen time. The building itself doesn't look particularly reassuring. Sturdy brick, yes, but stained and soot-blackened, with tall windows that haven't been opened since, well, possibly ever. Inside, it's dim. Not in a comforting candlelit way, but in a don't ask what's growing in that corner kind of way. The floor is stone, cold, and slick. The smell hits you immediately. A heady blend of sweat, iron, mildew, and something under it all that screams infection. You're here to deliver some linens from a local laundry, one of the few side jobs available to someone desperate enough to get near a Victorian hospital without dying on purpose. You walk slowly, careful not to brush against anything. You've read enough to know that hospitals in this time don't just fail at treating disease, they often cause it. Welcome to pre-germ theory medicine, or rather, early germ theory, floating vaguely in the air like a misunderstood rumour. Doctors are still arguing about whether invisible things can actually make you sick. Many believe illness is caused by bad air, miasma, so the priority is masking smells, not killing bacteria. You could be bleeding from the eyeballs and someone would probably try to wave lavender oil in your face and open a window. Here's your historical fact. Victorian hospitals, especially in the first half of the 19th century, had appalling mortality rates. In some wards, more than half the patients died, not always from their original ailment, but from infections they picked up after arriving. Surgical tools were rarely sterilised, hands weren't washed, bandages were reused. Pus was seen as a good sign, proof that the body was working through infection. Congratulations, you're leaking, that means it's healing. You shuffle past a nurse, her white apron stained and stiff, her expression somewhere between numb and harried. She's carrying a wooden tray with a chipped enamel basin and several instruments that look more like blacksmith's tools than anything remotely medical. She doesn't wear gloves. No one does. That's not a thing yet. Your fringe fact of the day? Some surgeons actually wore their surgical coats covered in dried blood and gore as a badge of honour. The dirtier the apron, the more experienced the doctor. It was considered proof that you'd done a lot of cutting. The cleaner your garments, the less respected you were. In other words, the more hygienic you looked, the more people distrusted you. Truly a golden age of medical logic. You finally make it to the linens room, if you can call a windowless cupboard with damp walls a room. The nurse takes the bundle from you and mutters a quick thanks before disappearing down the hallway. You don't follow, that's the surgical ward, and you're not feeling particularly brave today, but you can hear the sounds. Groans, a distant scream, the sharp clink of metal against porcelain. You don't know what's happening in there, and frankly you don't want to. Still, curiosity wins. You peek around the corner, just for a moment. Inside, it's chaos masquerading as care. There are no private rooms, just a long ward lined with narrow beds. Men lie beneath threadbare blankets, some with limbs splinted awkwardly, others breathing shallowly, eyes wide with fever. A man near the far end is missing a leg. You can't tell if he's asleep, unconscious, or worse. A surgeon is prepping for what appears to be another amputation. There's no anaesthetic, just a bottle of brandy and two orderlies holding the patient down. The saw's laid out neatly on a tray, its teeth gleaming. You back away. Here's the scholarly debate. How much credit should we give the Victorians for trying? On one hand, medical practices were often grotesque and wildly misguided. On the other, this was the century where some genuinely world-changing progress started to emerge. Florence Nightingale, for instance, introduced basic cleanliness to hospitals during the Crimean War. Ventilation, clean linens, fresh air, and the mortality rate dropped dramatically. Later, Joseph Lister would champion antiseptic surgery, changing the game entirely. But for now, in the middle of this grimy, overwhelmed ward, those changes haven't arrived yet. Or if they have, they're being ignored by a man in a blood-stained apron named Dr. Trevelyan, who looks more like a butcher than a healer. You retreat down the hallway, pretending not to notice a small pile of bandages tossed casually into a corner. You also pretend not to hear the thud of something heavy hitting the floor behind a closed door. If you stay long enough, they might ask you to help hold someone down. You're not ready for that. You'll never be ready for that. As you make your way back toward the entrance, you pass a young woman sitting in a chair, holding the hand of an older man. Her gloves are damp from wiping his brow. She smiles at you, small, tired, but genuine. It's the first real warmth you've seen all day. You nod, offer a weak smile in return, and step outside. The air hits you like a splash of cold water. It's not clean, not in this city, but it's not the inside of that building, and that's good enough. You breathe deeply, cough twice, and resolve to bathe in alum powder later, even if it stings like betrayal. You walk home slowly, shaken, your boots heavy with hospital floor grime. You think about the people inside, the ones who might get better, the ones who definitely won't, and the ones who came in with something treatable and left with something worse. It's easy to romanticize the past, corsets, candlelight, handwritten letters, but behind every velvet curtain is a hospital ward that smells like death, and bleach, and everything in between. You may survive Victorian hygiene, if you're lucky. But surviving Victorian healthcare? That's a miracle. After escaping the hospital with all your limbs and a strong desire never to look at a bone saw again, you figure you've earned a break. Maybe something simple. A nice walk in the park, a trip to the bakery, a moment without wondering what's fermenting in your chamber pot. But as you round the corner onto a cobbled side street, you spot a group of children, barefoot, sticky-faced and positively radiating chaos, huddled around a dead pigeon. One of them pokes it with a stick. Another appears to be daring the youngest to touch its beak. You pause, mid-step, and realise that tonight's journey is heading into the realm of Victorian childhood hygiene, or more accurately, the glaring lack of it. Let's start with this charming reality. Children in Victorian England are basically small, loud bacteria delivery systems. They run wild through alleyways, touch everything they shouldn't, and clean themselves only when bribed or threatened. Baths? Optional. Shoes? Rare. Hand washing? Only if someone drops jam on their fingers, and even then, it might just get licked off. Childhood here is not a sanitised pastel nursery filled with soft pillows and bedtime stories. It's a dirt-streaked, lice-infested, frequently barefoot free-for-all. In working-class families, cleanliness is a distant priority. Survival comes first. Kids often wear the same clothes for days or weeks on end. Those clothes are rarely washed unless they absolutely must be. And by must, we mean they can now walk around the room on their own. Underwear, if it exists, is a luxury. Shirts become progressively more see-through. Trousers are patched until they resemble abstract art. If a garment is too far gone to repair, it gets cut into rags, or passed, down to a younger sibling with lower standards and fewer opinions. Here's your historical fact. Infant mortality rates in Victorian England were staggeringly high. In some urban areas, nearly 1 in 3 children didn't live past their 5th birthday. And while poor nutrition and rampant disease were major factors, lack of basic hygiene played a huge role. Contaminated milk, filthy water, and general uncleanliness led to outbreaks of diphtheria, typhoid, and something charmingly named summer diarrhea, which is exactly as awful as it sounds. You walk past a narrow doorway where a toddler is sitting in the dust, gnawing on what looks like a button. His nose is running. His hair is stiff with some mysterious combination of jam, soot, and hope. A slightly older girl attempts to yank him to his feet, and the two stumble off together giggling. It's adorable. It's horrifying. It's a live-action public health hazard. You follow the crowd to a local school, a tiny brick building crammed between a bakery and a fishmonger. Inside, the air is thick with chalk dust and the unmistakable aroma of unwashed humanity. The children sit on hard benches, their clothes threadbare and their fingernails dark with something. A few have combed hair, most do not. The teacher, a wiry man with the patience of a saint and the cough of someone who's swallowed a coal mine, is writing on a slate. You spot several children scratching their scalps, a few picking at scabs, and at least one trying to eat his pencil. Here's your fringe fact. Some Victorian schools actually implemented cleanliness inspections. Teachers would check students' fingernails, ears and hair each morning. Children deemed unclean might be sent home or publicly shamed. In some areas, soap and water were provided by charitable organisations, but this was rare. Most schools simply tolerated the smell and prayed no one brought fleas. Back outside, a young boy runs past you, trailing what looks like a strip of toilet paper tied around his head like a crown. He's missing a shoe. His other foot is bare, bleeding slightly from a run-in with a broken bottle. He doesn't care. He's too busy playing hopscotch with 2 girls who've turned a piece of coal into chalk. They're squealing, jumping, laughing, their joy completely undiminished by the fact that they are absolutely categorically filthy. You start to wonder, how did parents cope? The short answer is, they didn't, really. Not by today's standards. Working-class mothers were often overwhelmed, overworked and outnumbered. With no running water, no affordable soap and no time, keeping children clean was a luxury few could afford. Some did their best. Sponge baths by the fire, boiled water in a tin basin, but any cleanliness was fleeting. 5 minutes later, that same child would be face down in a puddle chasing a beetle. For middle and upper class families, childhood hygiene was slightly more manageable. Wealthier, homes employed nursemaids or nannies who were expected to bathe children, brush their hair, and change their linen undergarments regularly. But even here, hygiene was more about appearance than health. A child might look tidy in public but still go to bed with lice, ringworm, or a nasty ear infection that no one noticed until the screaming started. There's scholarly debate over how much neglect actually occurred versus what was considered normal parenting for the time. Some historians argue that Victorian families were deeply loving and did the best they could under the circumstances. Others point to high child mortality rates, widespread malnourishment, and routine exposure to filth as evidence that children were often treated more like miniature adults, useful, replaceable, and expected to endure whatever the world threw at them. You pass a group of kids clustered around a pump, splashing water onto each other with gleeful abandon. One boy dumps a full bucket over his head, shrieking from the cold. His friends cheer. For a moment it's chaos. But then you notice some of them are cleaner now. Their faces at least are rinsed, their hands less grime-caked. Maybe this is their bath for the week. Maybe they're just playing. But either way, it's a small act of accidental hygiene, and it's oddly heartening. You head home as the sun begins to sink, your path lined with chalk drawings, half-melted candy and sticky footprints. You pass children playing marbles, wrestling in the dirt, climbing over piles of discarded crates. Every one of them is gloriously, unapologetically dirty, and despite your initial horror you realise something. They're surviving. Filthy, yes, but laughing. Covered in germs, but alive. You step into your tiny rented room, peel off your coat and brush coal dust from your sleeves. The day has left a fine layer of grime across your skin, and you smell vaguely of old bread and street puddle. You wash your hands and face half-heartedly, but your thoughts linger on the children. There's something profoundly Victorian about it all. A belief that dirt builds character, that scraped knees and jam-streaked faces are signs of a day well spent. Hygiene is still a work in progress, but resilience? That's here in full force. And maybe, just maybe, a little filth isn't the end of the world. By now you've scrubbed laundry with your own blistered hands, stared down an unsanitary bone saw, and narrowly avoided being sneezed on by a child who was at least 60% marmalade. But there's a whole other layer of Victorian grime waiting outside your front door. The streets themselves, those picturesque cobbled lanes you've seen in 1,000 romanticized paintings, are, in reality, a living, steaming, ankle-deep nightmare. You step outside and immediately regret it. The smell hits first. Not one distinct odour, but a swirling bouquet of everything that's ever died, rotted, fermented or exploded nearby. Horse dung. Naturally. That's a given. This is a city that runs on hooves, and each of those noble beasts drops somewhere between 15 and 35 pounds of contributions per day. Now multiply that by several thousand horses, toss in summer heat, and 0 citywide clean-up plans, and you've got a street that's basically paved in poop. You start walking carefully, every step a gamble. The cobblestones are slick with a mix of dung, coal soot, spilled beer, and what you're choosing to label general mystery. The gutters on either side are shallow trenches, ideally meant for water drainage, but really just collecting filth like open-air Petri dishes. Rats scurry through them with terrifying confidence. You see one dragging something that was probably once food, or a handkerchief, or both. Here's your historical fact. In 19th century London, the streets were regularly swept, but not by any organised sanitation service, at least not until the late 1850s. Before that, it was largely left to crossing sweepers, usually children or the elderly, who would clear a small patch of road for pedestrians, for a fee. No money. Enjoy stepping through a pile of horse droppings in your polished boots. Your hygiene is only as good as your pocket change. And as if manure wasn't enough, there's the added bonus of animal carcasses. Dead horses were a huge issue. These weren't small creatures you could just toss in a cart and wheel away. Some weighed upwards of 1,000 pounds, and when they died in the street, which happened regularly, it was a logistical crisis. Until the city's dead animal removal service, yes, that was a thing, could arrive, the bodies just stayed there, sometimes for days, rotting, leaking, becoming part of the city's rich, pungent aroma. You pass by a fishmonger's stall and instantly regret inhaling. The fish are mostly whole, barely iced, and displayed on boards that have never seen soap. A cat prowls nearby, licking something unidentifiable. A puddle of fishy water slowly creeps toward your boot. You sidestep it, but not quickly enough. The toe of your shoe is now forever cursed. Nearby, a coal cart rumbles past, its wheels grinding against the cobbles and kicking up a black dust cloud so thick you feel it settling in your teeth. You wipe your face with your sleeve, which only spreads it around. Congratulations, you're now wearing a street-level face mask made of soot and regret. Your fringe fact: street sludge had a name, mud, but not in the way you think. Victorian mud wasn't just wet dirt, it was shorthand for an industrial soup made of manure, soot, ash, dead animals, chemical waste and household garbage. It was so notorious that it inspired poetry. Terrible, deeply unhelpful poetry. Charles Dickens himself called London streets an invisible volcano of disease. A pretty phrase for an ugly truth. The debate among historians is whether people simply got used to it. Some argue that the average Victorian nose became desensitized over time. Others say people noticed, complained, and even protested, but were powerless to fix it. Sanitation reform was slow. Municipal governments were overwhelmed, underfunded, and often corrupt, and most people, especially the working class, had more immediate concerns than demanding a cleaner alley. As you walk, your eyes burn from coal smoke pouring from a dozen chimneys. You dodge a bucket of slop being thrown from a second-story window. No warning, no apology. It splashes across the street and into a gutter, joining the bubbling brew. A woman standing nearby doesn't even flinch. She just adjusts her shawl and continues shopping for wilted cabbages. You pause outside a pub, hoping for relief. It smells like beer, sweat, and fried something or other. Better than the street, barely. A man stumbles out, belching, then immediately empties his stomach onto the doorstep. No one reacts. Not even the dog asleep under the bench. This city has seen worse. Will see worse before sundown. And the street isn't just dirty, it's dangerous. With no consistent garbage collection, refuse piles up. Glass, nails, bones and broken crockery litter the walkways. Children play barefoot in alleys. Women in long dresses trip on rubbish heaps. Rats thrive. Disease follows. You pass a row of shops, bakers, butchers, booksellers, all operating within a few feet of each other and the nearest open sewer. One has a sign reading "Fresh bread baked daily." You glance at the baker's flour-dusted apron, then at the black streaks on his hands. You keep walking. It starts to drizzle. Not heavy, just enough to make the whole street slick and smell worse. The rain mixes with the street sludge and turns it into something horrifyingly mobile. You feel it soak into the edges of your trousers. You don't look down. You don't want to know. You round a corner and find yourself behind a cart stuck in the mud. The driver is shouting at his horse, trying to coax it forward. A group of men rush over to help, slipping and grunting as they push. One falls, lands in the muck and comes up cursing, covered in something no soap on earth can erase. The cart finally moves. The man limps away, dignity trailing behind him like his mud-soaked coat. Back at your lodging, you sit down and peel off your boots. They're unspeakable. You set them near the fire and pretend not to hear the faint squelch as they settle. Your socks are stained. Your trousers are splattered. You don't know what half of it is. You don't want to. You light a candle, strip down, and give yourself a hasty sponge bath with tepid water and a cloth that's seen better days. You scrub your face until it stings, sniff your shirt, and throw it into the burn later pile. You lie back on your straw-stuffed mattress, eyes closed, nose still faintly catching notes of horse and fish. You wonder how people ever left their homes in white gloves and crinolines. You wonder how they made it work, and you realise they didn't. They just walked through it every day. They layered perfume over it, made jokes about it, wrote sonnets to it, and hoped they didn't slip in it. This was street life in the Victorian age, not a backdrop, a battlefield. And tomorrow, you'll do it all over again. You're still trying to scrub the smell of fishy coal-slicked mud from your nostrils when the familiar creak of the laundry pulley reminds you of something even more personal, even more taboo, and somehow even more inconvenient: menstruation. It's not just that you're in a world that doesn't talk about periods, it's that the entire culture seems to be actively pretending they don't exist. Or If they must be acknowledged, they are treated with the same hushed horror as demonic possession or public drunkenness before tea. You're living in an era where women wear up to 5 layers of clothing, most of it tied, buttoned or fastened in ways that require a map and a second person. Now imagine managing a monthly bodily function in that get-up without modern pads, tampons or painkillers. No ibuprofen, no heating pads, just lace, lye soap and societal shame. In your rented room, tucked discreetly behind a folding screen, you inspect the tools of the trade, a pile of reusable cloth rags, carefully folded and wrapped in muslin. These are sanitary napkins, if one can use the word sanitary loosely. Washed after each cycle, dried behind the fire or out of sight, and never spoken of above a whisper, they're the only option for most women. And if you don't own enough of them, you improvise. Old linens, scraps of nightgowns, even wool if you're desperate. Comfort is not the goal. Absorption is. Here's your historical fact. Commercial disposable menstrual products weren't widely available in the UK until the 1880s and beyond, and even then they were considered unmentionably scandalous. Before that, Victorian women mostly relied on monthly rags, a term that, yes, gave rise to the euphemism on the rag. And while these rags were reusable, they were difficult to clean thoroughly. Boiling was recommended but not always possible, and remember, water is often cold, scarce and shared. You glance toward the wash basin, where yesterday's rag is soaking. The water has turned cloudy, tinged with pink. You feel a familiar ache start low in your back, curling around your hips like a crampy ghost. There's no middle, no doctor to recommend rest and hydration. In fact, most medical professionals don't really believe menstrual cramps are real. If you're doubled over in pain, they might suggest a brisk walk, or marriage. Now here's a fringe fact that doesn't often make the history books. Some 19th century doctors believed that menstruation was a form of the body purging excess energy, and that too much education, physical activity, or intellectual stimulation during this time could be dangerous. Girls were discouraged from studying Latin or mathematics during their periods, lest they strain their fragile reproductive systems and become infertile. Yes, your uterus could apparently be overwhelmed by algebra. Despite the widespread ignorance, there were a few forward thinkers. A small group of women's health reformers, like Elizabeth Garrett Anderson and Florence Nightingale, began to speak publicly and very carefully about the need for better menstrual hygiene and education. But the topic was still mostly locked behind closed doors, hidden in euphemism. Periods were referred to as the curse, monthly visitors, or simply those days. You didn't say it aloud. You didn't admit it. You just suffered in silence, with a hot brick pressed against your abdomen if you were lucky. You venture outside later that afternoon, bundled in layers to disguise the bulk of the rags between your legs. There's no elastic, no adhesive, and definitely no waterproof barrier, so you walk cautiously. Very cautiously. Every step is calculated. Every bump in the cobblestone carries the risk of shifting something loose. The anxiety is constant. Stains are social death. There are stories, whispered among girls, passed down like folklore, of women who bled through their skirts in church, in shops, on trains. Some simply fainted from the shame. Others were never seen in that neighbourhood again. If you're poor, you risk the gossip. If you're rich, you risk exile. In both cases, your dignity is as fragile as your petticoat. You pass a chemist's window, where a sign advertises Dr. Minton's female restorative tonic for nervous exhaustion and hysterical episodes. You know exactly what that's code for. Inside, the tonic sits in small brown bottles next to smelling salts and castor oil. It's laced with opium and alcohol and probably does make you feel a bit better, until you pass out or develop a lifelong addiction. But hey, at least you're not complaining anymore. There's some modern debate about how widespread the use of menstrual belts and other early inventions really was. Some historians claim women used rudimentary belt and pad contraptions made from elastic or cloth ties to hold things in place. Others argue that these were uncommon and impractical, especially for the lower classes. Either way, there was no one-size-fits-all solution, just varying degrees of discomfort, secrecy, and ingenuity. You return home with a discreet parcel of cloth tucked under your coat. The woman at the market stall said nothing as she handed it over, just nodded once and wrapped it twice in brown paper. The unspoken agreement: you don't talk about what's inside, and she doesn't ask why you're buying it with your head down and your voice low. Back in your room, you soak another rag in warm water, add a few drops of rose oil to help with the smell, and lie down on the narrow bed. Your corset is loosened, your knees are drawn up, you close your eyes and imagine a world where this doesn't feel like punishment. A world with heating pads, chocolate, and high-waisted leggings. It feels like science fiction. You drift in and out of sleep as the fire crackles softly. Outside, the city marches on, completely unaware that half its population is silently enduring cramps, bleeding, discomfort, and the constant threat of social annihilation. You wonder how many other women are curled up right now in the exact same pose, in rooms just like yours, with hot bricks and wet rags and nowhere else to go. You wake later to the sound of bells and feel the aching ebb in your back. You rise slowly, sore but stable. You clean your cloths in the basin and wring them dry. You hang them behind the stove to avoid curious eyes. It's not glamorous, it's not even functional really. But it's what's available. You manage. You endure. Like every other woman in this era, you navigate it in secret and then move on as if nothing happened. Because in the Victorian world, cleanliness may be next to godliness. But menstruation, that's just something you hide in the wash. By now, you're convinced the entire Victorian era smells like damp wool and subtle decay. And yet, somehow, even the business of dyeing doesn't offer a clean break. Today, you find yourself moving through the streets not as a gawking visitor or an unwilling laundry warrior, but as a quiet observer following the slow, solemn crawl of a funeral procession. Black horses with feathered plumes, mourning carriages creaking behind, men in top hats, veiled women with gloved hands folded at the waist. It's elegant, sombre, and frankly, if you sniff too hard, it still smells like mothballs and mildew. You trail along the edge of the crowd, and someone hands you a black armband. It's a sign of respect, a borrowed signal of mourning, even if you never knew the deceased. That's how it works here. Death is a public performance, and with that performance comes one of the least discussed and most pungent rituals of the era. Mourning clothes, and not just clothes, unwashed mourning clothes. You see, in Victorian England, grief isn't just something you feel, it's something you wear, heavily, publicly, and for an uncomfortably long time. For widows, that period is 2 full years of deep mourning, during which they are expected to wear nothing but matte black. No colours, no shine, no jewellery except for pieces made with jet, onyx, or, this is real, hair from the deceased. Because nothing says loving memory like weaving your late husband's locks into a brooch. Now, imagine wearing the same thick, black, heavily layered clothing every single day for months, possibly years, without washing it. It's wool. It's dye-heavy. It's designed not just to conceal, but to suffocate. You don't launder these garments regularly because black dyes of the time weren't colour-fast. Water could streak, fade, or outright ruin them, and so, the result? A class of clothing designed to mourn the dead while slowly becoming its own form of living rot. Here's your historical fact. Queen Victoria famously wore mourning for Prince Albert for the rest of her life. 40 years of black gowns, black bonnets, and minimal public appearances. Her example set the tone for the entire empire. If you weren't visibly miserable and thoroughly draped in crepe, then clearly you weren't grieving properly. The pressure to perform sorrow extended to every detail of appearance. No perfume, no bright scarves, no smiles if possible. You follow the crowd into the church where incense mingles with body odour, old wood, and the unmistakable funk of damp wool coats crammed together in a small space. The coffin is lowered. People sob quietly. A woman faints. A man coughs something wet and contagious into a handkerchief he'll almost certainly reuse later. The room is hot with emotion and human steam. No one opens a window. After the service, you linger by the door where women gather in clusters of matte black fabric. Some are still in the thick of mourning, shrouded in full-length black veils, wearing gloves even in the summer heat. Others have graduated to half mourning, allowed to wear dull purples, greys, or even mauve if they're feeling bold. It's like a grief rainbow, slowly transitioning from pitch-black despair to muted resignation. And now for a delightful fringe fact. Some mourning clothes were rented. That's right. If you couldn't afford a full set of black garments, you could borrow them, for a price. Of course, this meant wearing someone else's unwashed sorrow suit, complete with whatever stains, odours, or lingering lice came with it. But fashion waits for no one, not even grief. Mourning was too important to skip. Back in your lodging, you notice your landlady has pulled out her own morning ensemble. It's been wrapped in tissue in a cedar chest under her bed for 3 years, waiting for the next funeral. She shakes it out now, releasing a cloud of dust and something that smells like dried tears and mildew. She hangs it by the fire to air out, which mostly just infuses the room with the scent of preserved sadness. She tells you the crepe fabric used for mourning is notoriously hard to clean. It's crinkly, delicate, prone to tearing. The black dye was often made from logwood, a natural extract that bleeds and fades underwater. To wash it would risk ruining the garment completely. So it's not washed, maybe spot cleaned, maybe brushed, maybe hidden under another layer, but never truly laundered, and she's planning to wear it tomorrow. You watch as she buttons herself into the dress, no small feat given the number of hooks, stays and layers involved. She pins her veil in place and sits at the window, straight-backed and unreadable. The outfit transforms her from a chatty, opinionated woman into a silent, black-clad statue. This is the power of mourning. Attire. It doesn't just reflect grief, it imposes it. Scholars argue whether all this ritualized mourning was empowering or oppressive. On one hand, it gave structure to loss, especially for women. It offered a socially acceptable space to express sorrow and provided time before re-entering the marriage market, which was, let's be honest, always lurking. On the other hand, it turned grief into performance, and the garments themselves became a form of long-term sensory punishment. And what about the psychological toll of wearing the same heavy, restrictive, unwashed dress for months? The fabric itches. It chafes. It retains the smell of sweat, coal smoke, and salted tears, and the longer it's worn, the more it absorbs, emotionally and physically. Grief seeps into the fabric and you wear it, literally, every day. You think about the paradox of it. Mourning clothes that aren't cleaned, outfits meant to honour the dead but which, by the 3rd month, have probably started their own decomposition process. You wonder how many people developed skin conditions just from the friction of their grief. You help the landlady unfasten her veil at the end of the day. Her hair is damp, her collar stained with sweat. She folds the veil carefully, presses it between pages of a thick book, and hangs the dress back in the wardrobe. It doesn't go into the wash. It just waits. You sit quietly in your room, staring at the single black ribbon pinned to your coat. It's already dusty. It already smells faintly of whatever perfume you wore yesterday. You try to imagine wearing it for a year, 2, 4, a lifetime. Victorian hygiene isn't just about soap and scrubbing. Sometimes it's about the things you can't clean. The clothes that hold sorrow like a sponge. The rituals that preserve more than just memory. The grief you wear until it becomes part of your skin. And somehow, no matter how long you wear it, it never really comes off. After the funeral and the slow, suffocating fade of crepe fabric into firelight, you find yourself restless, coughing again, and realising, belatedly, that you've been breathing through your mouth for the past 3 hours. Not for dramatic effect, just survival. The air in your room, and in much of Victorian London, isn't air the way you know it. It's not neutral. It doesn't move, doesn't refresh. It's thick, stale, and slightly sticky. And as you sit near the window, trying to coax in some semblance of a breeze, you remember what people in this time truly fear. Bad air, miasma. That's the word echoing through the pages of medical journals, the sermons of concerned clergymen, and the tight-lipped advice of worried aunts. The belief that illness floats invisibly in the atmosphere, carried by foul odours and damp fogs. Not germs, not viruses, just stench. If it smells rotten, then it is rotten, and that's enough to get you sick. Your nose becomes your most trusted diagnostic tool. You open the window fully, but the outside world doesn't smell much better. Coal smoke, manure steam, and the ever-present perfume of decomposing something or other waft in like an aggressive houseguest. You shut it again. The inside might be hot and motionless, but at least it's your stale air. Here's your historical fact. During the 19th century, especially before germ theory fully caught on, many health experts believed diseases like cholera, typhoid, and even tuberculosis were caused by bad air seeping into the lungs. It wasn't just a superstition, it was institutional. Hospitals were designed with windows positioned to encourage cross-ventilation. Streets were doused in vinegar or carbolic acid to cut the stench. Entire neighbourhoods were judged by how badly they smelled. Richer homes even built separate airing rooms to freshen garments and linen away from the fumes of the city. You decide to take a walk to clear your head, hoping that maybe movement will make the air feel less like breathing through an old mattress. Outside, the fog hangs low and yellow, thickened with soot. You hear people coughing on every corner. Children wheeze, dogs sneeze. Even the pigeons look offended. You pass a row of tightly packed houses with windows sealed shut. That's another defense tactic. Keep the air out. If you can't smell it, maybe it can't hurt you. The irony, of course, is that now the air inside these homes is equally dangerous. Smoke from stoves, damp from wet laundry, dust from rugs that haven't been beaten since the last royal birth. It all lingers, mingles, and slowly becomes part of the furniture. A woman you know, a washerwoman with a collection of throat lozenges in every pocket, once told you she could feel the illness in a room. It's the walls, she said. They breathe the sickness in, and then breathe it back out when the fire goes cold. She wasn't wrong, entirely. Mould, mildew, and poor ventilation turned entire buildings into incubators, especially in the tenements, where entire families shared a single room, and fresh air was a distant rumour. Your fringe fact tonight. Some Victorians believed in the power of ozone rooms, not actual ozone, just heavily perfumed chambers that were thought to replicate the fresh, salty tang of seaside air. Machines were even invented to pump fake ozone into sick rooms using pine oil, vinegar, or other harsh-smelling substances. Did they help? Not really, but at least everything smelled aggressively pine-fresh while you coughed yourself to sleep. There's ongoing academic debate about how long miasma theory held sway over public health. Most agree it began to lose steam by the late 1860s, as scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch made breakthroughs in bacteriology. But even then, the idea of bad air remained lodged in public consciousness. People still associated illness with smell. Even today, some of us instinctively wrinkle our noses in a hospital corridor and think, this place smells like sickness. Blame the Victorians for that. They gave scent its sinister legacy. As you walk, you pass a group of men standing around a street lamp, smoking hand-rolled cigarettes and arguing about gas lines. The gas lights themselves are part of the problem. They burn coal gas, filling the air with chemicals that stain wallpaper, trigger coughing fits, and cause headaches. In some poorly ventilated homes, people wake up dizzy from inhaling gas all night. But it's modern, it's fashionable, it's progress. So everyone grits their teeth, wipes the soot from their noses, and keeps going. You return home and throw open every window in your room. Consequences be damned. The wind finally shifts, and for a brief moment, you catch a breath that almost smells like air. Clean, light, and faintly herbal. Someone nearby is burning lavender. Maybe as an offering, maybe as an act of defiance. Either way, you inhale deeply and immediately regret it. A sudden gust brings the city stench right back in, more aggressive than ever. You slam the shutters closed and light a candle. Victorian homes often use candles or small oil lamps to mask odours. Not that it worked. Most just layered a new scent over the old, creating an olfactory war zone of lavender, coal, mildew, and dead rodent. You light a second candle. Maybe if you fill the room with enough beeswax and wishful thinking, your lungs will believe in miracles. As you sit in the flickering light, you reflect on the strange, contradictory relationship Victorians had with air. They feared it, worshipped it, manipulated it. They tried to fight it with vinegar, smother it with perfume, and purify it with herbs. But they never stopped breathing it, because they couldn't. You lie back on the bed, one arm draped over your eyes. Your throat itches. Your head throbs. Maybe it's the coal smoke. Maybe it's the 20-year-old mattress stuffing slowly off gassing under your back. Maybe it's the silent judgment of 1,000 ghosts whispering, "Open the window and die already." Either way, the air isn't getting better tonight. But at least you didn't pay a penny to sniff fake ozone. You wake the next morning with a sore throat, a foggy brain, and the unsettling realization that your entire room smells like a perfume bottle that died violently in a coal mine. There's beeswax smoke hanging in the air from last night's candle. Your bedding smells faintly of your landlady's lavender sachet, which she insists wards off moths and unwanted energies, and your own clothes smell like, well, you. It's not great, it's not terrible, it's just a slightly musky, vaguely sour version of reality. And that's when it hits you. Perfume isn't a luxury in the Victorian world. It's a defence mechanism. You're not wearing scent to attract anyone or to express yourself. You're wearing scent to survive, to fight back, to mask the ever-present reality that nothing around you, including your own body, smells the way a human body should. Today, you dive nose first into the peculiar, intense and occasionally weaponized world of Victorian perfume. You reach for the small bottle on your washstand. It's not expensive, not even labelled, just a crude glass vessel stoppered with a cork, filled with amber-coloured liquid that smells like crushed rose petals and fermented gin. You dab a little on your neck, behind your ears and at the insides of your wrists, because you've read somewhere that's what you're supposed to do. It stings. That's normal. Everything stings in this century. Let's start with your historical fact. The Victorians were obsessed with perfume. The rise of industrial chemical production and alcohol distillation meant that perfume could be made more cheaply and in larger quantities than ever before. It wasn't just for the wealthy anymore. The middle class wanted to smell civilized, and scent became a marker of respectability. To be unscented was to be suspicious. To reek, social suicide. You head out into the morning fog, a thin veil of jasmine and coal clinging to your skin. As you walk, you begin to notice the scents of others. A man passes by, his beard dripping with bay rum and tobacco. A woman hurries past, her bonnet bobbing, leaving a trail of rose water and talc. A child smells of soot and treacle. A shopkeeper, lemon oil and desperation. But perfume wasn't just about covering up bad smells. It was also about spiritual protection. Victorians genuinely believed that scent could guard you from disease. Remember miasma theory? Foul smells were thought to carry illness. So, logic followed. If you surrounded yourself with good smells, you could literally purify the air around you. Many people carried scented handkerchiefs, called nosegays or posies, that they could press to their faces when passing through particularly foul areas. Think of it as the original face mask, except less effective and more floral. Here's your fringe fact. Some perfumes were made using animal musk, extracted from the scent glands of deer or civet cats. Musk was considered an aphrodisiac, but it was also believed to ground the wearer, adding earthy depth to otherwise airy florals. The only downside? It often smelled like exactly what it was, animal sweat, filtered through a velvet glove of rose and bergamot. You could smell someone's musk from across the street, which was the point. You duck into a perfumery near the market. The air inside is heavy, sweet, cloying, slightly medicinal. Bottles line the shelves, each with names like Night in Tuscany, Angel's Breath, and the particularly daring Lustrous Widow. Some scents are fresh, some are spicy, some are so strong you nearly sneeze. The shopkeeper, a man with unnervingly hairless eyebrows, explains that his finest perfume contains a tar of roses, distilled for days and cut with grain alcohol. Another, a men's cologne, includes clove oil, nutmeg, and a whisper of turpentine. You're not sure if he's joking. You leave with a small vial labelled Eau de Cologne No. 3, and for the next hour you smell like a citrus orchard that was struck by lightning. It's not unpleasant, just intense. You're beginning to understand why many people carried scent bottles on chains around their necks, or tucked into their waistbands. This is your armour, your shield, your very stylish, sneeze-inducing line of defence. As you pass through the town square, you notice that everyone is engaging in some form of olfactory management. A lady tucks a lavender-scented lace square into her corset. A man sprinkles rosewater into his gloves. Even the street sweepers dab their necks with violet oil, because no matter how filthy the streets are, you can smell like civilization, if only on the surface. And yet, not all scents are created equal. There's a hierarchy. Rose, lavender and lemon are respectable. Musk, patchouli and exotic resins? That's entering scandalous territory. Perfumes considered too heavy or too sensual were often associated with sex workers and actresses, two professions the Victorians lumped together with suspicious enthusiasm. So you had to tread carefully, wear too much of the wrong thing, and suddenly you're no longer someone's wife, you're someone's little secret. Scholars continue to debate just how widely perfume was used across classes. Some argue that only the wealthier had access to consistent quality scent. Others point out that cheaper synthetic perfumes made it into working-class homes by mid-century, often via travelling salesmen or apothecaries. Regardless, even the poorest families used scented soap when they could get it, or dabbed vinegar on their hands. or stuffed dried herbs into their drawers. It wasn't just about status, it was about survival, olfactory and otherwise. Back home, you dab a bit more of your new cologne onto your handkerchief and tuck it into your sleeve. It's potent enough to disguise the fact that your socks are damp again, and your mattress smells faintly of boiled cabbage. You light a cone of incense, one of the few luxuries your landlady indulges in, and for a few blissful minutes your room smells less like death, and more like questionable sandalwood. You lie on the bed, breathing deeply. The scent swirls around you, citrus, lavender, and something you can't quite identify. It's sharp, a little bitter, maybe clove, maybe regret. Whatever it is, it's covering up the rest, and that's enough. Because here's the truth. In the Victorian world, perfume isn't just pleasant, it's necessary. It's your barrier between yourself and the garbage trench, between you and the chamber pot, between you and your own unwashed collar. It's your lie, and it's a beautiful one. You close your eyes and drift off to sleep, wrapped in the fading illusion of bergamot and borrowed cleanliness, and for once your dreams don't smell like soot. You've soaked your wrist in lavender cologne, dabbed rosewater onto your scarf, and inhaled enough bergamot fumes to stun a mid-sized goat. But there's still a particular brand of grime you can't perfume away. Hair grime. Your scalp itches. Your hair feels like it's been brushed with molasses, and you're starting to seriously consider shaving your head and living out the rest of your days as a bald recluse. But don't worry, you still have options. In Victorian England, it's not just about washing your hair, rarely, or combing it endlessly. It's about where you go to maintain your mane, and today you're choosing between two very different experiences, a bath or a barbershop. The Victorian bath, as you now know, is a commitment. It requires firewood, buckets, courage, and a high pain threshold. If you're a woman, it also requires strategic timing, because you can't just let your hair down and dunk it. Washing your hair involves an entire side quest of its own. The average woman had hair that was long, heavy, and rarely cut. You don't just rinse and go. You wash, oil, comb, braid, and pray. You opt for the bath. Your landlady brings up a jug of warm water, barely warm, and a small bar of soap that smells like parsley and old wood. There's no shampoo. That word won't mean anything to anyone for another half-century. Instead, you lather your scalp with regular soap, which instantly transforms your hair into something that resembles wet rope. The suds are reluctant. The tangles multiply. You try to work it through, but your fingers get caught halfway. You think you hear your hair whispering threats. Here's your historical fact. Most Victorians wash their hair once every couple of weeks, or even once a month. And not because they were lazy, it was because frequent hair washing was thought to be dangerous. Wet hair meant exposure. Exposure meant chills. And chills meant death. Or worse, a visit from your overbearing aunt insisting on a mustard poultice. For daily or weekly grooming, the real workhorse was the hairbrush. Women brushed their hair with stiff boar bristle brushes every night, not just to smooth it, but to distribute natural oils from scalp to ends. The result was a shine that made up for the slight smell of scalp. And yes, they saved the shed hair to make those charming rats you learned about earlier. If your modern detangler saw what passed for a brush here, it would weep openly. You rinse your hair as best you can using the remaining water, lean over the basin, and nearly drown yourself trying to get the soap out. The towel you use to dry it is stiff, cold, and deeply judgmental. Your hair now feels like damp straw soaked in laundry water, but at least it's clean, technically. Now let's say you were a man, and for tonight you can be. You could take this whole hair operation to the barbershop. Not the kind of shop you went to for a shave, but one of the more casual, less terrifying establishments. There a barber might rub bay rum into your scalp and scrape away dead skin with his fingernails, while loudly complaining about Parliament. He might offer you a homemade pomade, bear grease mixed with lavender maybe, and style your hair into something aggressively respectable. And here's your fringe fact. Pomade wasn't just for style, it was a protective barrier against the elements. It helped keep coal dust, lice, and other surprises from embedding themselves in your scalp. The downside? It turned your hair into a solid mass that attracted more dust than it repelled. Hats were mandatory, not just for fashion, but to keep your head grease from staining your upholstery. You walk through the city with wet hair tucked under a bonnet. The cool air bites at your neck. You remember hearing that the average Victorian woman spent hours a week maintaining her hair, but rarely washing it. It's not that they were dirty, they were just efficient. Too much washing could strip your hair's vital essence. Better to oil it, braid it, pin it, and hope for rain. You pass a hairdresser's shop window and pause. Inside, a girl is having her hair curled with hot irons. She's sitting stiffly in a wooden chair, face pale, fingers clenched. The tongs are heated over a gas flame and applied with the same caution one might use to brand cattle. One wrong move and your curls are gone, replaced by the smell of burning hair and scorched dreams. Hair fashion, especially for women, is serious business. Elaborate styles, tight braids, and sculptural buns reign supreme. Women sleep in nightcaps to protect their hair. They use beeswax and lard to keep styles in place. Hairpins are everywhere, in pockets, pinned to corsets, stuffed into sleeves. You could probably stab a mugger with one if needed. And the unspoken rule is, the longer and thicker your hair, the more virtuous and feminine you are. Sorry if you've got a pixie cut. In this century that makes you a scandal, or at best, a recovering typhoid patient. There's some scholarly debate about whether all this hair effort really paid off. Some claim that Victorian women's hair was often healthier than ours today, thanks to the lack of harsh shampoos and constant heat styling. Others point out that women suffered from scalp infections, lice, and general itchiness with alarming frequency. The truth? Somewhere in between. Your hair might shine like polished walnut, but it probably also plays host to a family of fleas. Back home, your hair is finely dry. Mostly. It's poofy, frizzy, slightly sticky at the crown. You brush it 100 strokes like you've seen in old manuals. It takes forever. You find 3 knots, a leaf, and what you sincerely hope is lint. Your arm goes numb. But eventually your hair settles into something close to presentable. Not glamorous, but survivable. You tie it back into a low bun, stick a comb in for good measure, and wrap it in a scarf for the night. You hope it holds. You hope it doesn't attract more soot. And as you lie in bed, you marvel at the sheer volume of effort it takes to deal with hair in this era. You're not just styling, you're surviving. You're creating a protective barrier against lice, judgment, and the world itself. Because in the Victorian age, your hair is more than a hairstyle. It's a battleground. You're not sure if it's the lingering pomade fumes or the realization that you've just spent half a day detangling soap from your scalp. But as you sit in the narrow breakfast nook of your lodging house the next morning, a thought dawns. What about oral hygiene? You've spent weeks obsessing over bathing schedules, chamber pots, scalp treatments, and morning attire. But your mouth, arguably the germiest part of your whole operation, has gone criminally under-addressed. Time to fix that. Spoiler alert, it's about to get grim. You glance at your breakfast, day-old bread, a hard-boiled egg, and tea that tastes like boiled boot with a hint of milk, and realise you've already got several food groups clinging to your molars. Reaching into your small wooden box of personal items, you pull out what passes for a toothbrush. A thin wooden handle with coarse animal hair bristles. Horsehair maybe. Boar. Something that used to neigh or grunt. It smells faintly of soap. Maybe mould. Maybe something more alive than you'd like. And no, you don't have toothpaste. You have powder. This is where the morning goes sideways. The tooth powder is chalky, greyish, and smells faintly of mint mixed with ash. You dab the damp bristles into the tin and then hesitate. Because yes, it's also gritty. That's not your imagination. It's literally ground up bone, charcoal, and baking soda, plus maybe a few aromatic herbs to convince you it's doing something noble. Here's your historical fact. Victorian tooth powders often included abrasive substances like brick dust, charcoal, and powdered oyster shells. They were excellent at scrubbing away surface grime. Also excellent at slowly grinding down your enamel until your teeth looked like crumbling plaster. But hey, at least they were white. You begin brushing, gently, because the bristles feel like someone lashing your gums with a tiny wire broom. There's no foam, no tingling minty refreshment, just a dry scraping sound and the faint taste of bitterness and earth. You can feel the powder sticking to the back of your tongue. A gag reflex stirs, you push through, you spit into a cracked basin, rinse with cold water from the jug, and stare at yourself in the mirror. Your teeth look fine, maybe a little grey in the corners. You lean in closer and see that one of your molars has a chip, not new, but suddenly very present. So what if you need actual dental help? You brace yourself and head out into the street in search of a dentist, a term that, in this century, ranges from skilled professional to guy with pliers who yells a lot. You find a small shop tucked between a dressmaker's and a tobacconist. A wooden sign swings overhead. Dr. Ephraim Blatter, dental surgeon and horsetooth specialist. Promising. The room smells like clove oil and damp sawdust. A grimy curtain hangs between you and whatever horror show is happening in the back. You hear a moan, maybe a groan, possibly both. A boy comes out with cotton stuffed in his mouth and a vacant stare. You take a seat. The dentist, when he emerges, looks like someone who's seen too much. His apron is streaked, his hands stained, and his instruments lay on a tray like items confiscated from a cursed blacksmith. He offers you a chair, a hard one tilted back just enough to make you feel vulnerable. You decline anything invasive and instead ask about cleanings. He chuckles, offers you a swish of whiskey and a pick made from mother of pearl. You thank him and flee before he brings out the hand-cranked drill. Fringe fact time. Anesthesia wasn't common in dentistry until well into the 20th century. While ether and chloroform existed, they weren't regularly used for minor procedures like extractions. Instead, patients relied on whiskey, opium, or sheer stubbornness. Some dentists offered bite sticks. Others just suggested you scream into your shawl. Victorian dentistry was a choose-your-own-pain adventure novel, and most endings were tragic. You step into a chemist's shop afterward, hoping to find a mouthwash or something approximating it. The closest available option is a bottle labelled elixir for the breath, a peppermint-laced alcohol tincture that claims to invigorate the tongue and restore polite confidence. You take a sip. Your eyes water. Your tongue burns. Your polite confidence is replaced by a choking cough. Back home, your landlady shows you her own dental kit. A silver-handled brush, no bristles left, a tiny spoon for scraping the tongue, and a blackened clove that she swears helps with pain. You just tuck it against the gum and wait for it to numb, she says, popping one into her mouth with a wince. You nod, not convinced. There's scholarly debate about how much oral care Victorians actually practiced. While some had regular routines, brushing, rinsing, even flossing with silk threads, many did very little. Sugar consumption was rising, especially among the middle and upper classes, and yet dental hygiene hadn't caught up. Rot, abscesses and chronic halitosis were common. Most people simply adapted. Bad breath was endured. Missing teeth were accepted. False teeth, often made of wood, ivory or other people's teeth, were proudly displayed. And yes, that's a thing. Recycled human teeth. After the Napoleonic Wars, it became common for soldiers' teeth to be collected and sold to dentists. These so-called Waterloo teeth were fitted into dentures for wealthier clients who wanted a smile with a backstory. You can't make this stuff up. You sit down by the fire, brushing your tongue with a cloth soaked in salt water, wondering if there's such a thing as nostalgia for mouthwash, even a minty gum, anything. Your breath probably smells like a coal-fired mint leaf at this point, better than some, worse than others. You comb through a women's magazine from the sitting room, noting a section called To Polish the Smile. It recommends lemon juice, charcoal, and rubbing the teeth with crushed sage leaves, all of which will clean your mouth, and then erode your enamel like acid rain. But the goal here isn't longevity, it's appearance. You're not trying to be healthy, you're trying to look like you might be healthy, just long enough to marry or avoid a scandal. You sigh, stretch your jaw, and sniff your own wrist. Still minty. Sort of. You've survived your first full Victorian oral care routine, and while your gums are bleeding slightly and your mouth feels like a gravel driveway, at least you can say you tried. And as you tuck into your supper, meat pie, mushy peas, and another slab of bread, you pause just long enough to wonder, how did anyone keep their teeth at all? The answer, many didn't. But that's a section for another night. For now, chew slowly. There's only so much clove oil and mint rinsing you can do before the illusion of cleanliness begins to fall apart. Your teeth are technically scraped, your scalp is less crunchy than before, and your socks are, miraculously, only lightly damp. You should feel victorious. But instead, there's a growing awareness settling over you, a prickling behind your ears that whispers, it's not enough. Because it turns out there's a storm brewing here in Victorian England, a quiet revolution with soap and sanitation at its centre. And no, you're not leading the charge, but you're about to witness the front lines of the cleanliness movement, and frankly, you might want to take notes. You start your day by delivering a parcel to a nearby charity hall, tucked between a crumbling apothecary and a church that always smells faintly of damp hymn books. The parcel contains bars of carbolic soap, brick-shaped, chalky and aggressively fragrant, like medicinal lemons that went to boarding school. The hall's front windows are painted with the slogan, "Cleanliness is health, morality and godliness," which sure sounds dramatic, but in the Victorian mind it's deadly serious. Inside, women in plain dresses hand out soap, leaflets, and stern warnings about the dangers of filth. A banner overhead reads, "Wash the body and the soul will follow." You consider suggesting they also wash the floors, which are sticky, but you decide to keep that thought to yourself. Your historical fact for the evening: the mid-19th century saw the birth of organised public health campaigns aimed at improving hygiene among the working classes. Reformers like Edwin Chadwick argued that poor sanitation wasn't just disgusting, it was actively killing people. His 1842 report on the sanitary condition of the labouring population exposed the grim link between poverty, filth and disease. For the first time, filth wasn't just a personal failing, it was a public problem. The room hums with soap-scented energy as a speaker takes the front podium, a middle-aged woman with a tight bun, an iron stare, and the speaking style of someone who once gave a rousing eulogy for a lost mop. She talks about sewer systems, bathhouses, and the need for proper disposal of night soil. Several attendees shift uncomfortably at that term. One woman raises her hand and asks if using lavender sachets in the privy counts. The answer is no. You sneak a leaflet from the table near the door. It's printed on stiff cardstock and features a diagram of a properly ventilated privy, a recipe for homemade soap, and a reminder that cleanliness invites opportunity. You fold it and slip it into your pocket, mostly because the drawing of a grinning, fully clothed bathtub is deeply unsettling. And here's your fringe fact. Some reformers believed that public bathing and washing facilities would actually reduce crime. The logic was that dirt led to moral decay, that if you could just clean people up, literally, you could clean up their behaviour too. Soap, they believed, had the power to fight sin, poverty and unruliness. It was the moral disinfectant of the age. Later that day, you pass one of the new public bathhouses that have started popping up in larger towns. Outside, a queue of people waits patiently, clutching small bundles of linen and worn towels. Entry costs a penny. Inside, each person gets access to a cubicle, a bar of soap, and, if the gods are kind, enough hot water to make the whole process feel less like punishment. It's not luxury, but it's clean. And in this world, that's revolutionary. The bathhouse isn't just a place to scrub, it's a statement, an equaliser. The fact that working-class families now have access to bathing facilities makes a huge dent in the Victorian class structure. Cleanliness, once the exclusive domain of the wealthy, is slowly becoming available. And not just for vanity. Public health is now part of the conversation. Fewer lice, fewer infections, fewer cholera outbreaks caused by that unfortunate habit of draining privies into the local water source. Of course, not everyone is thrilled. There's plenty of pushback from the upper classes, who worry that giving the poor access to soap and plumbing will erode the social order. Because how can you tell who's respectable if everyone smells vaguely of lavender and carbolic acid? If even the chimney sweep looks polished, how are you supposed to judge people at a glance? There's also scholarly debate about how effective these early efforts really were. Some argue that reformers were more focused on controlling the poor than helping them. The emphasis on moral hygiene, clean body, clean soul, was a convenient excuse to shame people into conformity. Others point out that, whatever the motives, the results were significant. Infant mortality dropped, cholera rates fell, and for the first time in recorded history, the average person began to expect cleanliness. You spend the afternoon helping fold towels in the bathhouse laundry room, a steamy cavern filled with boiling tubs, wrung linens, and a smell that could either be progress or wet dog. You learn how to scrub lye soap into armpit creases, how to spot the difference between soot stains and something biological, and how to dodge flying suds launched by over-enthusiastic volunteers. By the end of your shift, your hands are red and cracked, your apron is soaked, but for the first time in days you feel oddly hopeful. Because here, beneath the stink of humanity and the hiss of steam, something is changing. That night, you light a small lamp and unfold the leaflet again. There's a list of clean habits to begin today. You've already done 4 of them. Brushed your teeth, poorly, washed your hands, multiple times, bathed, technically, and avoided sharing combs with strangers, always a good rule. It feels like a checklist for a new kind of life, one with fewer rashes. You lie back in bed and let the scent of soap linger in the air. It's not perfume, it's not glamour, but it is a beginning, and in this age, even that's a luxury. The next morning arrives with an unexpected gift, a beam of sunlight slicing through the soot-streaked window, illuminating the stack of still-damp laundry like it's holy scripture. You stretch, feel a slight pull in your shoulders from yesterday's towel-folding marathon, and realise, grudgingly, you're starting to understand how Victorian people endured all this. Not because it was easy, not because they were tougher, but because they had no choice. If you wanted to live in this century with some semblance of self-respect, hygiene wasn't optional, it was war. And today, you're investigating the last front of that battle, public sanitation, or what happens when the system stops working and everyone starts dying. You've been invited to accompany a sanitary inspector on his daily rounds. That's right. There are men whose actual job is to poke around in the filth of Victorian cities and try to make sense of it. This one, Mr. Elbridge Cotter, meets you at the edge of an alley in a brown overcoat that seems to repel light. He carries a notebook, a pencil worn down to a nub, and the haunted eyes of a man who's seen one too many flooded cellars full of human waste. The first stop is a tenement. Not one of the charming ivy-draped ones with lace curtains and the sound of piano lessons drifting from upstairs, but the kind that looks like it might collapse if you lean on the wrong wall. The hallway smells like wet rope and turnips. Children dart past you barefoot, smearing jam on the banister. A mother tries to mop the floor with a rag tied to her foot. Mr. Cotter leads you to the basement where the privies are located. If you're expecting flush toilets, don't. These are pail closets, essentially wooden boxes with removable buckets underneath. The buckets are full, over full. One tips slightly as a rat scurries behind it, and you immediately forget how to breathe. Here's your historical fact. In the mid-19th century, most lower-income housing in London and other cities relied on either cesspits or pail systems. Sewers existed, yes, but only in the best neighbourhoods. And even then, they weren't always connected to anything useful. Many people simply dumped waste into the street gutters, or the Thames. In 1858, during the infamous Great Stink, the smell of the river became so unbearable that Parliament had to be suspended. The solution? Lime. Gallons and gallons of lime poured into the water like a desperate cocktail. You flee the basement for air and find Mr. Cotter noting open cesspool overflowing, suggest immediate carting. Carting in this case means summoning one of the city's night soil men, who come under cover of darkness to collect human waste in large barrels and wheel it out of the city. You saw one once. He tipped his hat at you with a gloved hand and smelled like a bog-caught fire. A noble profession, perhaps, but not one that gets you invited to many dinner parties. As the day continues, you visit several more properties. One has a broken drain pipe pouring directly into the street. Another has an upstairs chamber pot that's simply dumped out the window at intervals. At one point, Mr. Cotter jots down a note about fecal seepage into kitchen wall. You nearly vomit into your borrowed hat. And here's your fringe fact. Some tenement buildings were so poorly ventilated and so overrun with waste gases that they became literal death traps. Methane from accumulated sewage sometimes built up in walls or floors and could ignite with the spark of a lantern. There are documented cases of whole buildings catching fire because someone struck a match too close to a privy. Hygiene wasn't just a matter of cleanliness. It was life or death, sometimes explosively so. You pass a group of children playing in the gutter, splashing in a puddle that's definitely more disease than water. Mr. Cotter sighs. We try to teach them, he says, but you can't drain ignorance as easily as a cesspit. He seems tired, not in a dramatic, poetic way, just in that slow, quiet erosion of a man who's shouted into too many rooms and been handed too few buckets. And yet, progress is happening, slowly. In 1848, the first Public Health Act was passed, allowing for the creation of boards of health. Inspectors like Mr. Cotter gained the authority to issue warnings and in some cases enforce repairs. Later acts expanded those powers. More sewers were built, more public toilets appeared, more cities began to understand that managing waste was not just about aesthetics, it was about survival. There's debate among historians about how much these reforms actually helped in the short term. Some argue they were undermined by lack of funding, corruption, and general public apathy. Others point to clear improvements, fewer cholera outbreaks, cleaner streets, and eventually the development of underground sewer systems that rivaled anything in Europe. Either way, it was a long game. A sewer doesn't build itself overnight. A population doesn't change habits in a year. You return to your lodging, clothes slightly spattered, soul slightly bruised. Your landlady eyes your boots and mutters something about leaving them outside. You don't argue. You strip in the hallway and wash your hands in the kitchen sink with scalding water and soap that now smell suspiciously comforting. Sitting by the fire, you think about what you saw today. Not the filth. That's impossible to forget. But the effort. The dogged persistence of people like Mr. Cotter, trying to coax a city toward hygiene one privy inspection at a time. The volunteers teaching children to wash their hands. The women distributing carbolic soap to families with 5 kids and 1 bucket. It's not glamorous. There are no speeches, no parades. But it's the foundation of everything we take for granted. Running water, working toilets, the ability to walk down a street without dodging human waste. You look around your room, modest, still slightly damp but clean. Cleaner than it was when you arrived. Maybe cleaner than it's ever been. You light a candle and let its scent mingle with the lemon soap still clinging to your skin. And you think, it's not a revolution. It's just a slow, stubborn refusal to let filth win. And honestly, that's more impressive than any war story. By now you've endured steaming laundry buckets, collapsing privies, vinegar-scented bandages and soap that could double as a weapon. You've watched surgeons operate with unwashed hands and seen a rat drag what was definitely a toothbrush into a drain. You've smelled enough miasma to last several lifetimes. But tonight, your final night here, you sit alone in your room, soft candlelight flickering across the walls, and ask the question that's been simmering under every chamber pot and sloshing down every cobbled street. Did any of it actually work? Was Victorian hygiene just a series of painful rituals performed in the name of respectability? Or was it the awkward beginning of something better? You pull your blanket tighter, listening to the usual chorus outside. Boots on stone, distant coughing, the occasional horse whinnying in existential despair. And you think about everything this society tried to fix with a bar of soap and a stern pamphlet. Illness, poverty, crime, sin. It wasn't just about cleaning the body, it was about cleaning the world, or at least pretending you could. Let's start with your final historical fact. By the turn of the 20th century, many Victorian hygiene practices had begun to evolve into the familiar routines we now take for granted. Daily washing was more common, at least among the middle class. Indoor plumbing spread. Toothbrushes became standard, and toothpaste started showing up in tins and tubes. Municipal sewer systems expanded. Public health boards became permanent fixtures of government. Soap stopped being just a suggestion and started being a household staple. But that transition wasn't smooth. For every well-lit bathhouse or squeaky clean chemist shop, there were still slums with no water supply, children bathing in puddles, and landlords who refused to fix collapsing drains. For every doctor who believed in germ theory, there were 3 who still blamed the air. Change came, but slowly, unevenly, and not always to the people who needed it most. And here's your final fringe fact. In the 19th century, there were travelling hygiene lecturers who toured towns and villages giving public demonstrations on how to wash properly. They brought props, bathtubs, fake toilets, exaggerated models of skin pores, and charged admission to watch them scrub fake grime from mannequins. It was part science, part theatre, and part moral sermon. And honestly, you'd probably have paid a few pennies to watch someone else deal with the mess for once. The scholarly debate that still lingers today is this. Did Victorian hygiene improve health because it changed how people lived, or because it gave governments and reformers a way to control how people lived? Were soap and sanitation tools of liberation, or subtle weapons of class-based domination? Some historians argue that the obsession with hygiene, especially among the middle and upper classes, was less about actual cleanliness, and more about drawing lines between the deserving clean and the undeserving dirty. Public bathhouses, for example, were often supervised with the same suspicion you'd expect in a prison yard. Working-class mothers were scrutinised, judged, and sometimes punished for failing to keep their children neat, even if they had no access to clean water. Others say, who cares? The death rates dropped, infant mortality decreased, people lived longer. Yes, the methods were flawed, and the motivations weren't always noble, but in the end the soap still got used and the sewers still drained. Maybe it doesn't matter whether the brush came with a lecture, as long as the brushing happened. You stare at your chipped wash basin one last time. It served you well, mostly as a stage for your nightly sponge baths and ill-fated hair experiments. You run your hand over the edge, still faintly slick with soap from earlier, and think, this basin represents something more than just hygiene. It represents hope. Not the naive, rose-scented kind, but the hard, grimy kind that grows in alleyways and survives even the worst-smelling privy. Tomorrow, if you were to stay, you'd scrub another floor, boil another sheet, and brush your teeth with powder that tastes like powdered regret. But for now, you climb into your straw mattress, tucking your slightly less filthy body under a wool blanket that smells more like you than you'd like to admit. The room is quiet now. Even the street noise has faded into distant murmurs and hoofbeats. The fire crackles gently, the air is thick but not choking, and for once your nose isn't full of mildew or someone else's cologne. Just your own sweat and the faint tang of coal smoke. You close your eyes, trying not to think about lice, or fleas, or the ominous squeak from the wallboards. Instead, you think about the people who got up every day in this grimy, bustling world and tried. The girl who washed her one pair of stockings every night so she could walk to her job with dignity. The man who shaved with cold water because his boss liked a clean-cut clerk. The widow who boiled her son's clothes in vinegar and prayers because she couldn't afford a medicine. They weren't perfect, but they were persistent. And maybe that's what hygiene really was in the Victorian era. Not purity, not perfection, just persistence. A daily decision to be slightly cleaner than yesterday, even if the water was cold and the soap stung. You take one last breath of this strange, pungent century and let it out slowly. Not clean, but cleaner. And for now, that's enough. And now, finally, you let go. Not just of your grime-caked boots or that scratchy wool blanket you've been curling under for weeks, but of the entire weight of the Victorian world. You've lived in it, trudged through its sludge, sipped its gritty tooth elixirs, dodged disease, soot, and wildly flung chamber pots. You've braved the unwashed masses and the even less washed doctors. You've inhaled enough carbolic fumes and lavender sachets to permanently confuse your nose, and after all that, you somehow came out with your dignity mostly intact. A few soap rashes, yes. Some mild emotional scarring from privy visits. But dignity, still here. You lie in your bed, your real bed now, with modern sheets and pillows that aren't stuffed with sawdust and curses. The air around you is suspiciously breathable. It doesn't reek of cabbage stew, nor does it feel like a moist slap to the face. It's just air. Cool, still, clean. You breathe it in like a miracle, and you realise something unexpected. For all the jokes, the sarcasm, the what even is that smell moments, there was something weirdly admirable about the whole mess. The Victorians were clawing their way toward progress one boiling bucket at a time. They didn't have hand sanitizer or floss or government-mandated food inspections, but they cared about propriety, about presentation, about trying to make sense of a world that seemed determined to be as gross as possible. You've seen what people endured before hot showers and flush toilets. You've lived it in your own, bizarre, time-warped way. And now, as the flicker of firelight fades into the hush of modern stillness, you feel it. Relief. Yes, but also respect. So, tonight, as you slide deeper under your clean sheets, maybe spare a thought for the washerwomen, the sanitary inspectors, the poor souls brushing their teeth with chalk and prayers. They paved the way so you could bathe without a coal stove and mourn without mildew. Now close your eyes. No rats, no chamber pots, just dreams.